If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
For those who've genuinely encountered out-of-this-world phenomena like glitches in the Matrix, portals, vortexes, other dimensions, parallel worlds, or similar experiences, share your scariest and strangest story.
A glitch in the way. I was 16 at the time I experienced this glitch. I call it a glitch because it's the only answer I could come up with, but it's nice to get a new perspective. My then boyfriend, whom we shall refer to as S, was driving me home following a date night with several friends. I lived on a well-known mountain in my area that was once a gated community, but it hasn't been one for many years. When you first enter the community, there is a small patch of woods on either side of the road. As you continue, a pond becomes visible on one side and a bus stop on the other, with the road running in between. Before entering the road that leads to my neighbor, we saw a few signs saying road work ahead and such, but never saw any road work. We turn on my road, and right before the break-in in the trees, we see what is more accurately described as a rather large tree lying across the road with huge boulders lined behind it. We thought it was a bit odd but didn't give it much thought. We just figured we would take the alternate route up the mountain. As we look behind us to back up and make sure we didn't see any cars or anything, we are confronted by traffic cones directly behind us blocking us in. Now, he and I, being the hotheads we are, were instantly outraged and thought some kids were playing around. So he took out his flashlight and began to search the woods for the ones who pulled this prank while I moved the cones. I stacked them on the side of the road and reversed the car as he was coming out of the second set of woods, breathing heavily from running and saying he saw no one. He asked me where the cones had gone, and I explained that I had moved them and tried to point to their location, but there were no cones there. We were scratching our heads completely dumbfounded for what seemed like 5 minutes just trying to figure out where those cones had gone and came up with absolutely nothing. He takes me home, and the next day when he picks me up, I try and talk to him about it, and he gets really weird with me. He remembers the log but has no recollection of running through the woods or the cones. According to him, we just turned around and drove off. After he seemed a bit odd and made up some excuse to go home. I never brought it up again, and he didn't either. I still have no idea what was going on that day or why he didn't seem to remember without a half hour of time. This happened in the summer of 2011 or 2012. I wasn't camping but was just out for a day hike in Jay Cook State Park, Minnesota. It was a sunny day, and I was enjoying the weather and scenery. I suddenly got that feeling that I was being watched. Amazing how that comes and goes sometimes and raises the hackles. I didn't think much of it because it happens occasionally. Then everything went silent. The wind stopped. The birds stopped. I stopped. I looked around, and by this point I was pretty scared shitless. I heard a crunch and then some kind of growl. My first instinct was a black bear because they are in the area, not in high numbers, but they are there. At that point I just turned and ran as fast as I could for the exit, which is a bridge that crosses the St. Louis River. It was probably a mile or so, and I had never run so fast in my life. Eventually I got close enough to the bridge that I saw other people, and that's when all the sounds came back and the wind picked up again. Creepy as hell. This was before I ever knew anything about Missing 411. And in fact I think it was about a year before David Paulides started his work. Thinking back on the experience now, I did a search, and it turns out another hiker went missing in that park a few years prior and was never found. It isn't a big park. Needless to say, I take the woods far more seriously today. I had a very odd experience while hiking a familiar area, not sure what to think of it. Yesterday I went hiking in Desolation Wilderness, a gorgeous area in the Sierra Nevadas. I was with 2 less experienced friends, and we were climbing Pyramid Peak. About a third of the way up, I was walking in front when I heard an unfamiliar noise coming from the trees ahead of me. It sounded like a slow creak at first, when 2 trees rubbed up against each other. For some reason, it caught my attention, even though it's pretty normal to hear throbbed kinds of sounds. I keep walking a couple steps and hear it again, but now it sounds almost like 3 solid taps on a tree, as if you'd taken a stick and hit a tree. I stop and try to locate the sound. I say, "Did you guys hear that?" And they respond, "No." I brush it off and resume walking. I hear it again, and it is even more pronounced now. I feel this need to see where the sound is coming from, and it feels irrational. You'd hear the sound again, but now it is coming from the side, away from the trail. I almost follow it but I'm hit with this feeling of dread. It was so clear I'm getting goosebumps as I'm typing this. Something deep inside me screams, "Don't follow." I freeze and stand there for a bit. My buddies thought I saw something and stopped with me. The knocks continue, with each trio moving off a bit into the distance. My friend says, "Yo, are you good?" And I turn around suddenly and say with wide eyes, "You guys are telling me you didn't hear any of that?" And they look at me with a side eye, saying, "No, what do you mean?" I feel like I do again, who doesn't want to make myself seem crazy and brush it off, saying, "Never mind, it was nothing again." I couldn't brush off the feeling of dread. I asked them 3 more times throughout the hike if they really hadn't heard anything, and at this point I began rationalizing it to myself that I just heard a woodpecker and somehow got freaked out. The strangest thing is I hadn't even heard of this phenomenon. I honestly don't know what to think of this, and I doubted even sharing this because it sounds crazy to me to get freaked out over a couple creaks in the woods. I grew up near a park in upstate New York, and at the age of 14, I had a rather unusual experience. My parents' property extended to the edge of the woods, so my friend and I would hang out on the trails with a walkie-talkie that my mom could use to contact us. There was a section near our land where a railroad had once existed, leaving behind an embankment that served as a trail in one area, which people used for horseback riding. Normal park/wood stuff. We ventured out that July morning in search of crab apples and wild blackberries, having observed them just off the trail the previous day, and somehow became hopelessly lost for several hours. We did find the spot where I remembered seeing berries, but then we couldn't locate the trail, the way back, or any road. This should have been impossible because if we had walked straight long enough, we would have eventually reached a road, an access trail, or at least the railway. Eventually, we reached a road, but when he came out of the woods, it was raining. And had it clearly been raining for some time? It hadn't rained for however long we'd been in the woods. It was 2006 and we didn't have a phone, but we went in before lunch, and it was clearly late afternoon. We ducked back into the woods to stay dry, but it was wet, soaking wet, in the woods all of a sudden too. Gave up and walked on the road until we ran into my dad, who was out in his car looking for us. He had always said if we got lost in our woods, we'd have to get to a road and then backtrack, otherwise stay put and wait for help, so he knew we'd be on the road if not in the woods. It was 6 p.m., and we'd been missing long enough. My mom had called him home from work and called the police once it started thunderstorming at noon, and we hadn't come home and weren't answering the walkie-talkie. The weird part was that my friend and I swear it wasn't raining or even wet in the woods. It was sunny, and we could see the sun through the leaves all afternoon. I also never was able to find the spot we had gone off the trail for berries again, even when I went back the next day with my dad. It was weird, and I'm so glad we didn't end up a statistic. A place not meant to be discovered. Over the summer I was in a situation where me and my partner at the time had to find a place to camp outside. It was a town in which I had spent my entire life, so I was very familiar with it. We were walking on a main road looking for a dry, foresty area to wrap up in some blankets and sleep in. I've gone up and down that road my whole life, and I never noticed this little side road. It was secluded and woodsy, so we headed in. Immediately I noticed a different sense of energy once we crossed the first set of trees. There were lightning bugs, or fireflies, depending on where you're from. I noticed that they were all spaced equally apart and at the same distance from the ground. Their lights weren't pulsing but were constant. They weren't flying but hovering. I just wanted to turn back and get the duck out of there. I said we weren't meant to be here. This wasn't a place for people who weren't invited. We still pressed on, going a little bit down the road and off into the tree line. There was a clearing and a cornfield behind us. The moment we entered, I sensed someone watching us, but now, as we stood still, that feeling intensified tenfold. Then we saw a car turn into the beginning of the road, and it stopped there. They pulled out a spotlight and shined it on our side of the woods, walking a little. We got on our bellies, not moving an inch. However, they didn't go very far down the path, and they remained completely silent. I couldn't tell if it was a cop, but I figured if it was, they would have yelled at us to get out. But they left. Now my heart is pounding in my chest, adrenaline is pumping, and I just want to leave. So we sat there for a while, hearing a crunch every now and again, and the air felt thick with the sensation of being watched and surrounded as they closed in. Honestly, it felt like they were huge animals. And there were many of them. After 10 minutes we said duck this and hurried the duck out of there. The lightning bugs were in the same place as before, not pulsing, and hovering in the exact same spot. I ran my hand under/over them to see if there was something holding them, but nope. We jet the duck out of the dog and start walking on a bike path across the street. After a couple of minutes the guy points to the other side of the road and there's a bald man, windbreaker on, red or orange, beer belly walking at the same exact pace as us. I mean at the exact same time. Naturally I'm pretty freaked out. We had to cross that side of the path while crossing the street and no one was there. The way he kept time with us felt completely unnatural. I walk faster, there's nothing and no one around. It's 2 a.m., barely any traffic. I pick up the pace and get my knife out. But guys, This is where it gets really ducking creepy. When I look back over to the other side of the road, there is not a man, but a huge dog. It was far too big to be a coyote. And there are not supposed to be wolves in that area. But more so, that dog used to be a man. And again, it was in perfect time with us. Not an inch ahead of us. Not an inch behind. An absolutely impeccable gait. After a while, though, it wasn't alone anymore. There were 3 smaller ones behind it now. By this time, we had already walked nearly 2 miles. They followed the entire ducking way. That same unsettling feeling of being watched throughout the night. Like, what the actual duck? They never barked/howled. They never tried to cross the street and approach us. They knew all they had to do was watch us to get the point across. I have always had a tendency to attract inexplicable things and situations, so I am accustomed to accepting that some phenomena are beyond our current technological capabilities to explain. But yeah, shapeshifters are ducking real. I was completely ducking sober. Creepy as hell, a thing happened on a walk a couple days ago. Having given up my vices of pot, cigarettes, painkillers, and sedentary living, I'm trying to get in shape. So I've been taking long walks around my neighborhood. I will mention immediately that this is the neighborhood in which I have resided since I was approximately 10 years old. Now that I'm 24, I'm familiar with the area. So it's dark. It was later than I usually walk, but not so late that I felt worried. The neighborhood isn't so awful. So I head out and wind up further away than I've ever walked before. As I'm walking, I look up at a church, then thread the needle between 2 bushes that were crowding the sidewalk from both sides. On the other side is a somewhat ghettoish corner store. I pass by the front, and an older man steps out of the doorway with a bucket of water and dumps it into the parking lot. At this point, it's late, and I decide it's time to head back. I turn right and then take another right to return down the adjacent street. After a while, I notice 2 more bushes crowding the sidewalk in the exact same way. I look to the right. There's the church. I get a feeling of dread, because I have a feeling I know what's coming. I go through the bushes, and boom, there's the corner store. The guy comes out again, and yeah, he dumps the bucket of water into the parking lot. I guess it's possible I could have looped around, but that easily would have meant a 10-minute and 2-turner walk. I absolutely did not do that. Definitely one of the more surreal things that's ever happened to me. I once had a truly terrifying experience at a park I was very familiar with. I consistently followed the same trail, and I was bringing a dude there on a date. He's now my boyfriend, but this was our second date, so we didn't know each other that well. It was like 3 p.m. in winter, so we had about 2 hours of light left, but the trail we were walking was like 40 minutes at most. So we stopped to rest and we started talking about folktales, and he's from Guatemala, so a lot of the conversation was about duendes. Not sure if this is important at all, but I can't help but distinctly remember this was the last thing we talked about before things went south. We suddenly arrived at a bridge that was labeled with the name of a creek that runs through the park. Problem is that this specific creek was nowhere near where we were. I was dumbfounded. He didn't understand my confusion and just thought I had a brain fart or something, but there was just no way this was possible on the trail we took. I decided to keep going, and the trail began to look familiar again, although it was in reverse. All the landmarks were coming up in the opposite order, and I was just really disoriented from this. It made no sense that we would be walking backwards. I was seriously considering turning around. This is when he began to notice my panic and anxiety, even though I was trying my best to remain calm. But I guess I kept questioning things out loud, and he found that suspicious. We had about half an hour of light left at this point, and we just kept walking and walking. The trail should have been over by now. There was no way it should have taken this long. That's when he started really freaking out. He told me later that he legitimately thought I was pretending to be lost so I could end him or something, because I swore to him I knew this park super well. And I couldn't blame him because I was just some random dude he met on Tinder. Remember that this was only our second time hanging out. He was legit bugging out and started sprinting down the trail ahead of me. He even suggested cutting through the woods off the trail to make it back. I had to run after him and tell him to calm the duck down because the moment we panic is the moment we lose this battle, lol. Plus we had to get out of here before dusk, so we needed to make a decision and stick with it. At this point we kept turning around and taking different trail points, and I was like, okay, this has to stop. I kept getting tricked by recognizing landmarks and then realizing they were in the wrong order and the trail I picked was wrong after we were too far down it. And no ducking way was I going to cut through the woods off the trail like he suggested. I basically had to shake him out of his hysteria and take charge. Even though I was super panicked inside, I was pretty proud of myself for being able to hold my shit together. So I was like, let's just follow this trail we are on and take absolutely no more turns. It has to lead somewhere. It was getting very dark at this point. We had no cell service out here either. And the guy I was with was still freaking the duck out. Finally, I could see the big lake that's right by the parking lot, and I was so relieved. Finally, something made sense. Sticking to one trail took a while, and I had to fight everything in me to not change course because the trail we were on was just not right in my mind. But then I was able to just keep the lake in view at all times and make our way around it. I got back to my truck after dark, and I half expected years to have gone by like I was in a time warp or something, but nope. All was normal. I tell people this story, and they always say I just got lost, but man, it was really freaky, and things were legit backwards. I know this park like the back of my hand. Never had this happen before, and never has it happened again. It still makes me shudder to this day. Really felt like we would never get out of there. The park is not particularly large, so it seemed as though it was expanding to confine us, which is somewhat amusing in retrospect. Something that happened when I was a kid gave me the fear of falling. When I was a kid, our family went camping with another family. My brother and I got along with a little girl from the other family, name forgotten. Our dads decided to go fishing in the large creek/river that was nearby. That was when the little girl and I thought it would have been a good idea to explore the forest a little. We ended up on a slight cliff overlooking our father's fish. Thinking it was awesome, we leaned over a little bit to get a better view. I suddenly fell and was hanging on for dear life. My friend was shocked and tried to get me up to no avail. At that time, we were both younger than 10 years old. We screamed for our fathers to help us, which did nothing. Our fathers were both too far away, not being able to hear us. As we screamed and screamed, panic started coming in. No one heard us. That is why I remember this moment so damned well. We panicked so much, and my fingers were slipping off the cliff. My new friend just got up and ran towards our mothers. I don't remember much afterward, but I remember my survival instinct kicking in and climbing back up. When I walked into camp, everything was as normal. The little girl was even cooking with her mother, apparently she never left. Years later, I have a mortal fear of falling, and I can't stand near places where I think I could fall off. I don't like cliffs, I feel terrified in an elevator, and I always wear anti-slip boots during the winter. Also, while I was pregnant with my kids, both times I was a practical recluse. I asked my mother about it, and she denied it ever happened, telling me that I remembered it wrong. If I remember it wrong, where does this fear of falling come from? Teleportation? My house is in a pretty small neighborhood with no shops nearby, the closest one being a 20-minute walk across a huge field with tall grass surrounded by trees that people mostly use for dog walking. One night, around 9:30 p.m., I was taking a walk to the shop for some snacks, and something super strange happened that I still can't explain. The field has a gravel path right down the middle leading from one side to the other. These days lampposts are installed, but this was a few years ago when crossing the field in the night meant paying lots of attention to stay on the path. So I got to just over halfway through the field, following the path as I did every time. I reached into my pocket for my phone to check the time and accidentally pulled out a 5-pound note with it, which landed on the gravel path at my feet. I distinctly remember reaching down and picking the 5 pounds up from the gravel and putting it back in my pocket. I continued walking and switched my phone screen on for literally 2 seconds to see the time, and as soon as I switched it back off I was in the middle of the tall grass, a good 40-50 feet away from the path. Somehow, in those 2 seconds, I had checked my phone. I had gone from walking on the gravel path to walking in grass that came up to my waist. Although it doesn't sound particularly scary, the feeling of utter confusion as to how it had happened still spooks me to this day, remembering what it felt like to stand in the tall grass in that dark field. I moved away for a couple of years, so I didn't venture that way again, and now I've moved back home. There's a new shop that doesn't require dealing with teleportation to get a can of root beer. The restaurant disappeared and then was back 3 weeks later. There's an amusement park in my area that my wife and I go to every now and then. On the exit to get there was a Wendy's on the left-hand side. My wife and I stopped there quite a bit for lunch before going on our previous trips. 3 weeks ago we went, and the building and their large highway sign were gone. The building was just not there, and there were a bunch of semi-trucks in the parking lot. No signs of anything. We figured the business closed, and they leveled the building. Fast forward to yesterday. My wife and I were coming up to the exit, and to our amazement the building was there, with a large highway sign. The building looked just as we always remembered it. We were both baffled by what we saw, knowing that there had been nothing there 3 weeks prior. My wife isn't one to believe in paranormal/oddities like this, but even she admitted this was freaky. Has anybody experienced this? I still can't believe it, and there's no way they would have built a new building, including a huge highway sign, in that period of time. I think I walked through a portal? Okay, to start, I am a 25-year-old female. I enjoy hiking trails. I wouldn't really call it hiking because it's Florida, but you know what I mean. I like to walk in the woods. I recently moved to a new apartment in September, and this last month or so I've been trying to find good trails for me to walk. I finally found one. I took my boyfriend's dog with me the first couple of times I went. It wasn't a hard trail, but it was long. It's surrounded by trees and a lot of squirrels, but it also can lead to a nice lookout over the marshland, which is very pretty. Anyways, this past Sunday it was a little chilly, and it had been drizzling on and off all day. My boyfriend and I had gotten into a disagreement, so I decided I wanted to walk. The trailhead is about 15 minutes from my house. It wasn't far at all. When I arrive, I put on my shoes. I hate driving with shoes on, and put on my jacket, and I always carry a knife on me. You never know what could happen. My headphones were in my ears, and I set off. Everything was normal, and I knew exactly where I was at and where I was headed. There is a fork in the trail with a sign and a map letting you know, you are here, and this is where you can. I even took a picture of the map of the Judas Agreement. I decided to go right. I walk. Go to the lookout over the marshland. I succeeded in reaching the map of the Judas Agreement, and it took about 30 minutes. Remember, I said it's a long trail. I spent about 20 to 25 minutes there just listening to my music in the marshland. I was walking around the area. It was still relaxing. I needed it. Now this is where things become a little weird. I am a conspiracy theorist, and I do believe in glitches and portals and all that jazz. However, nothing had ever occurred to me that would solidify this belief until last Sunday. Have you ever heard that if there are trees perfectly inlined across from one another on a trail that it's a portal? If you walk through them, you are supposedly entering another dimension or something similar. I've always joked when I see trees perfectly lined up on a trail, saying, hey, look, a portal, but no one really understands the reference. It's always been in my mind since I've learned about it. Basically, I just never took it seriously. On my way back to my car, I walked down the same trail I had taken to get to the lookout. I was dancing to my music, and I had transparent hearing on so I could also hear the rain hitting the trees. This time I noticed trees that were perfectly lined up, and I walked through them mumbling portal and thinking nothing of it. I do it all the time. About 15 minutes into the walk back, I needed to use the restroom. I am not opposed to squatting, so that's exactly what I did. It was the woods, I was alone, so what? I took a right turn off the trail, walked about 10 feet, got behind a tree, and did my business. Then I walked back to the trail the same way I came and continued in the same direction I was going before, which meant turning right when I exited the woods. I continued walking in the same direction, but when I started to pay attention, I realized that everything looked different. There was a bench off to my left a few feet ahead that wasn't there before, and then I noticed the leaves were a bright green, and they weren't like that before. I kept walking, and I noticed a bunch of benches along the trail. There were weird shaped trees I didn't recognize, and I honestly just kept going, not stressing too much. I didn't pull out my phone and check because I was confident when it came to that trail. I knew all of it, or so I thought. Eventually I came to this little boardwalk. I'm assuming the ground got super wet there, so they had to build the boardwalk, but still, I had never seen it before, and that's when I started getting freaked out. I enjoy strange things, and despite feeling a bit uneasy, I continued walking and observing my surroundings. I walked for another 20 minutes before I found myself in a parking lot for a different trail that I had not seen during my research, and I was unaware of its existence. I finally pulled out my phone and looked at my maps. I had walked 45 minutes in the opposite direction. How? I don't understand how this happened. I took the exact same route to the lookout, yet now I find myself 45 minutes away from my car. I stood confused for a minute or two before I decided I just had to walk back, check my maps to make sure I'm going the right way and just hope I make it to the other side. After 45 minutes of walking I finally made it back to my car. I've been thinking about this since it happened. The feeling in my body was confusing but calm while my brain tried to figure out where I was. I didn't feel in danger. I've only told my best friend about this experience, and she agrees that it is strange because I am an avid trail walker who doesn't get lost on trails and knows the rules. I follow the rules. So how did I end up on a trail that I didn't know existed? Can someone make it make sense? Am I crazy? I think my wife and I experienced the same glitch at the same time. We were driving home from a day out together and having just the best time listening to music. We live in Iowa and we were driving home to Cedar Rapids from Waterloo, watching the sunset while cruising south on Interstate 380, when all of a sudden, everything for a half second went completely black, and then came back almost as though reality glitched. A couple of things to note: we were not near an overpass, we didn't crash, and we didn't see anything else unusual. Believing I was either losing my mind or experiencing a medical issue, I turned to my wife and inquired, "Did everything just go black for you as well, even if only for a brief moment?" My wife, who has epilepsy, responded and said, "Yeah, but I thought it was just my head playing tricks on me. You experienced that as well. Have any of you ever experienced this before? And if so, do you have an explanation for it?" A mimic floor in my office building? I honestly can't explain it. I went to work at 6:30 a.m. as usual. Everything was normal up to this point, until I reached the building where the security guard wasn't there and the gate was open. I thought to myself, maybe he went somewhere, so I went in and parked my car in the usual spot. Now to explain the layout, there is 3 elevator and facing them 1 door behind it is the stairs, and when you face the elevators on your right there is a big door and on the left there's the dub C door on every floor. Back to me, I developed the habit of taking the stairs since I worked on the 4th floor and try to be active. So as usual I went into the building and opened the stairs door. It was weirdly dim, but thought nothing of it and climbed to the ground floor passing the closed door, and the next flight of stairs was even darker and I heard a weird low rumble from up the stairs. Going up I can see the door is open and it's dark.
When I reached the door, I was stunned to find that the 3 elevator doors were missing. Instead, there was just a wall with only the small monitors glowing faint red, all displaying the letter G. I peeked from outside and noticed that the other doors were missing too. It was just a dark room with only the elevator monitors.
I partially closed the door and noticed that the sign that says 1st floor wasn't there. I felt cold, so I ran to the 4th floor and went to my office, trying to process what I just saw. During the break, I went down the stairs and found that the door had the sign, and the inside looked normal. I know what I saw. Am I going crazy? I'm not on drugs or sleep deprived. Here is my experience on how it is very easy to get lost for hours and not be able to be found. So I belonged to a different country and had the first time coming to the US to study at a university, which was located in a typical American college town. The college town was remote, had very few residents besides the college students, and was located adjacent to what I assume is a forested area. I was 22, and it was my first day in the town and the country. Remember that since I was from another country, I had a cell phone but no US card, so no network or access to any GPS other than a printed copy of the campus map. On the first day itself, I got invited to an afternoon party on campus. I left the party early and alone, around 4 p.m., since I was pretty tired. I hadn't drank any alcohol at the party either. I lived outside the campus. The walk to my place from the party venue usually took just 15 minutes. But since it was my first day, I had a card and knew how to reach my place. I thought I'd have a paper map to refer to on the way. To my surprise, there was no one else at that point of the day that was walking on the road, and there were quite a few cars going by on the road. I tried to wave down a few cars to ask for directions, but they didn't stop, maybe thinking that I was a threat. After a few minutes, even cars stopped coming to the area where I was at that time. It was a very forested area with just one road going in between. At this point I was pretty sure I was lost. I was walking for about 3 to 4 hours. With no energy left, no food, and no water. On the way, I even saw a couple of animals and started running, scared of them. I heard a lot of scary animal noises. I also passed by a body of water, which I suppose was a lake. I was exhausted at that point and couldn't see anything clearly because of the dark. I could have even fallen in the lake. I was pretty sure I would never get back alive, or anyone would even find me, since hardly any people in fast-running cars had seen me. I swear, luckily, when it was quite dark, I saw an area that I thought I passed in the morning when I took a cab from the airport to the place I was staying at. I cannot express how happy I was being there. I was scared for life, literally. From that location, I reached my apartment in 10 to 20 minutes. As soon as I arrived home, I told my roommate the entire story, and he could not believe that no one had seen me while I was lost. In the days that followed, whenever I shared this story with locals, they often found it hard to believe how I had reached such an isolated place and survived, frequently asking if I had been drunk at the time or if anyone had given me drugs. But none of that was the case. They were even surprised to learn that no park ranger had seen me. Nowadays, many years after that incident, my family and friends always tell my story as entertainment. This incident serves as a reminder of how easily an adult can become lost for hours, ending up in a completely unfamiliar and distant location without anyone noticing. A hill, 2 friends, and a piece of wood. This event happened around 15 years ago when I was around 7. I do not remember everything clearly. I don't remember sharing the story with anyone. I should say, it sounds rather odd. My friend and I were walking around when we came to that little hill. We found a quadratic piece of wood. My friend is about to turn it around, and in that moment, or better, I, saw some sort of face on it. My friend dropped the piece of wood, and we both ran away very quickly, as fast as we could. I do not remember clearly how the face looked, but what we saw on the piece of wood clearly scared us quite significantly, otherwise, we wouldn't have run away. I have no memories as to what happened after that day and whether we told somebody. A few days later, another boy and I returned to that place. I don't remember whether it was my friend with whom I had this experience. We then found the piece of wood, and it was nothing special. Note that I am not exactly sure what it was, as I said I don't remember everything clearly. A circle was drawn on it and the letter SS. It was probably some kind of sign, but it is difficult to determine its meaning now. I remember I watched it with disbelief. Seems this was enough for me to mostly forget the experience. My simple theory is that my brain convinced itself that the experience was imaginary so I wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. I am fully aware this story seems to have holes and sounds like a dream. I am sure it was not a dream, although it could be possible. Of course it could also be possible that I am mixing up memories, but I thought I might share this story anyway. Before you ask, my friend moved away. I have had no contact with him in years. The last time I saw him was in 2006, but I didn't mention it because I mostly forgot that story, and it only recently came back to me. How likely is that we both hallucinated this face? I felt like I got transported into a liminal dimension for a brief moment. I don't really know what category my experience would fall under. However, earlier this summer, I had an unusual experience while fishing that I have been unable to fully forget. It started off normally. It was a warm, windy day with overcast skies. I was making my way to a fishing spot that was just out of town. This place was an open beach that is located at the mouth of a river. It's quite the hotspot during summer, so there are always at least a handful of people fishing in the area. But when I arrived, the beach car park was completely empty. This really didn't raise much concern because at the time I went on a Tuesday and assumed most people would be at work. However, I've fished on other weekdays and there has always been at the very least one or two people fishing. Anyways, I continue on as normal and cast my fishing line. Around 45 minutes go by, and nothing happens. The sounds of seagulls and albatross permeate my surroundings, but then I feel a growing sense that something is wrong. It felt like I was somewhere where I shouldn't be. The best way I can explain the feeling is that it is similar to being inside an empty mall, walking down a long hallway, or feeling like you have trespassed somewhere, if that makes sense. This is where it gets really weird because the wind then suddenly drops along with the sounds of the wildlife like a switch. I only heard the waves, but they sounded unusual, as if the same ones were repeating. I can best explain it as if a small piece of time had been sectioned off and was playing in a loop. At that point, I was really startled when I noticed this, and the same feeling at the start was growing more and more. It hadn't even been a full hour and a half since I had been there, so I decided that I shouldn't stay any longer and left. Now, I don't know if I would classify that as a paranormal experience, since one could argue that everything that happened was merely a series of coincidences, which is certainly possible. But I just can't get over the abrupt halt of the ambient wind and sounds, which to me was the really strange, unnerving part about the whole experience. What about you guys? Have any of you experienced something similar? I'm really curious to hear if you guys went through a similar paranormal/glitch in the Matrix moment. More stairs than usual. I'll keep this brief. About 4 to 5 months ago I had this strange occurrence while I was walking down the flight of stairs from my apartment. I walked down the first set in a fast manner, my eyes focused at my feet. A smudge on the wall caught my eye as I was about to descend the next flight of stairs. I stopped to look at it. It was the same bicycle tire smudge as the one I had by my apartment door. I looked at the door, and it was my apartment door. I could not comprehend this for a moment. I immediately ran back up the flight of stairs I had just come down and I was on the 4th floor. I know for a fact that I had walked down one set of stairs and should have been on the 2nd floor, but I ended up back on the same floor I had just walked down from. I have no idea how to even begin to explain how this happened, except that I had experienced some sort of glitch. A buddy and I went deer hunting in Sam Houston National Forest. It was an overcast morning with a light drizzle that hid the sun. The sky was a uniform gray horizon to horizon. Not that we could see that much, the woods are closely packed tall pines. The rangers had been cutting pine beetle infested spots, so it was one small clearing, a dense patch, and another clearing, on and on. We stopped at the end of a dirt road at a location we had scouted before. Walked down a hill and crossed a small creek. We could jump it, then picked up a game trail on the other side. Not wanting to be too close to the road and other hunters, we hiked in for a good 15 minutes. We had gone through 4 to 5 clearings on what appeared to be a wild hog trail. I figured we were in a good spot, so I stopped and looked for a good place to hunker down. I was raised in the big thicket of East Texas. You learn to never step off the road or trail unless you know the lay of the land. Which way the creeks flow, what roads, lakes, or rivers border the woods you're in, and how big an area are you walking into. We were boxed in by Lake Conroe and 3 highways, 4 miles long, 3 miles wide. 2 dirt roads dead-ended in there, but there were a lot of overgrown timber-cutting roads. When I turned and looked, I couldn't see the trail we had been following. Unimpeded hogs will walk a trail down to bare ground. Easy to walk on, easy to follow, and you leave footprints in the mud. We had been up on a wide, bare trail until I looked back. Nothing but wet weeds. We were standing on a trail that just evaporated a few feet in both directions, taking our footprints with it. My buddy had a habit of relying on me for navigation. I told him I was a little confused and that I wasn't going to hunt until I had a better fix on our position. We headed back the way we had came looking for our trail. I got ahead of him and started searching like you would look for a blood trail. Wider and wider arcs in the direction we had just come from. I got nothing. I knew I was looking in the right direction based on where we were standing when we stopped. He was behind me on the trail, and I turned and looked past him. We had been traveling in a nearly straight line. I should have found a trail right off. Panic doesn't sneak up on you. It comes running at you screaming bloody murder. Only your wits keeps you from getting carried off, so you fight to keep your wits about you. I have a compass in my hunting bag, but I had left it in the truck. My buddy didn't carry one. One not smart thing to do to myself. I was sure I was moving in the right direction, but I had nothing to back it up. After about 20 minutes of searching, I told my buddy the deer hunt was over. We were truck hunting now. I knew it was a couple of miles to either highway or the lake if we missed that dirt road. I made my best guess at the direction the truck was in and started navigating a straight line toward it. You pick 2 trees lined up in the direction you are going, one as far as you can see, the other about halfway. As you approach the first tree, align it with a tree further along your path, and then proceed to the second tree. If you know what a ley line is, then my description may make sense. Lather, rinse, repeat. We came to that small creek about an hour later. We had been walking in taller weeds and gotten soaking wet by then. I told my buddy I was pretty sure the truck was upstream. Since we were soaked and the creek was easier to travel, I was going to walk the creek bed. He balked. I told him not to leave the creek, I would send help back to pick him up. He got in the creek and started wading upstream. 50 yards later I spotted the truck. That is the only time I have ever been lost in the woods. I know it is easy to get lost, I'm out in there often enough that it probably should have happened to me, statistically. But how it happened still bugs me. We were on a trail, bare ground, a foot wide. Looked back and it was gone. It took us an hour to get back to the creek after we quit looking for the trail. We had only been in the woods 15 minutes when we got lost. Trust me, I was hunting going in, covering ground coming out. We weren't walking in circles. I can't explain the time and distance difference. I can't explain the trail disappearing. I won't hunt there again. Lost in time/space. Has anyone ever been lost in a place where they're familiar? My friend and I tried to meet up at a cemetery to visit a friend. It was late at night. I have visited this cemetery for over 12 years. Every holiday, birthday, etc. I was meeting a friend there to visit at night, and we got lost. I pulled into the north entrance of the cemetery and parked. As I waited for my friend, I got an eerie feeling and pulled out of the cemetery, through the south entrance, and drove a bit down the road. I was on the phone with her the entire time. She drove north towards the cemetery, I was driving south, away from it. She got to the cemetery, passing me, and still didn't see me. I asked her to park and drove back to the cemetery. Both of us had our brights on, and I saw no one there. She said she was parked in the cemetery and didn't see me. We continued to drive up and down the road, opposite each other, and never found each other. We then decided to meet at the church, off the highway. We were on a back road. I pull up to the church, and so does she. We finally found each other. Is there any explanation? About 3 to 4 years ago. Went camping with my mom, dad, brother, and BF at the time in northern Utah. It was an actual campground. I'm pretty sure it was only us remaining at that point, but we were going a bit late in the season because my dad couldn't get time off work sooner. Anyway, there weren't very many people camping at the time. Maybe 3 other cars were parked at the far end from where we were. It appeared that the 3 other cars belonged to a single group, which occupied the largest camping space. The days were pretty uneventful, but the first few nights we were there, I couldn't sleep very well. I have a hard time sleeping in new places, and I'm not a hug camper by any means, so sleeping in a tent outside was unfamiliar. Those first few nights I heard pretty normal sounds, bugs, wind in the trees, and occasionally the people way down the lot laughing. But probably around 1 to 2 a.m. each night I'd start to hear footsteps around our smaller campsite. I heard it coming from the direction my parents' tent was, so I figured it was probably my dad getting up to pee or something. No big deal. The last night we were there, it would have been our fourth night, it was pretty quiet. The other campers had packed up and left that morning. I'm pretty sure it was only us at this point, but I'm not 100% positive. I still wasn't sleeping very well, so I was up reading a book on my phone or something, and I heard the footsteps again. They came from the direction of my parents' tent as usual, and I didn't really think anything of it until a few minutes later when I could still hear someone walking around. The sound got louder, and I could tell they were now much closer to the tent I shared with my brother and BF. I woke my brother up and asked if he could hear anything. He listened for a minute, likely still half asleep, and said it was probably just a squirrel or some other animal before going back to sleep. I tried to go back to sleep too, but every few minutes I would just hear soft but deliberate footsteps almost circling our camp. When we all woke up in the morning and started putting our stuff away, I had almost forgotten about it until I noticed bare foot marks all around our camp. Like actual human footprints in the dirt. And they were everywhere, around where my parents' tent had been, around my tent, and near where our fire was. It was so weird and unsettling. I'm not sure who it was or what they were doing, but it creeped me out to no end just knowing that while I was lying awake, there was someone else less than 3 feet from my head. My friend and I had a strange experience about 15 years ago in the woods about 15 miles south of Flagstaff, Arizona. We lived in these woods and would often spend entire days on the trails. One perfect spring day we found a new trail branching off the one we'd been on a million times. We both thought this was really weird since we'd never seen it before and we were there the day before. So we decided to take the new trail. After about 45 minutes of riding down this new trail we arrived at a creek with 50 feet tall cliffs with stones perfect for climbing. It was like we were in a different forest. The ponderosa pine forest is usually plain and brown, but this area was so vibrant and beautiful I could feel it physically. My friend and I spent hours splashing in the creek and jumping from stone to stone. Then a super old couple wearing tracksuits showed up. They told us that they'd been going to that spot for decades and that it had special healing properties. Normally, I don't really believe in all that crap, but I could physically feel it. From the moment we arrived I felt a delightful sensation in my chest and under my skin. Once the late afternoon hit, we decided to head back. For some reason we decided to leave the backpack we'd brought because we were coming right back the next morning. The next day we spent the entire day searching for that spot again. The trail had just disappeared. We knew exactly where it had been and even tried heading in the same direction without the trail. Not only could we not find the spot, but the woods in the area didn't even look similar to before. Instead of cliffs and a creek, there were just endless pine trees. Now, in retrospect, I think we might have actually found a magical forest. It took us 2 hours on bikes to get there. How the hell did these super old people walk there with no water or backpacks or anything? I still go down that trail a few times a year, and I constantly look for that mysterious trailhead, but 15 years later, still no luck. I would give anything to find that place again. This experience occurred approximately 6 to 7 years ago. I would frequently take hikes through nearby parks to relax and get exercise with my dog. I have never had an experience ever on one of my hikes. In fact, this particular park, where I had the experience, was considered my office. My job at the time involved a lot of driving, and I would stop at this park to eat lunch and do paperwork instead of driving home or to the office. In fact, there were times when I hadn't slept well at night or wasn't feeling good enough that I would take a nap. This park was close to the Illinois River, and there were some houses within 1/4 mile. The distance to the nearby town was a little more than 1/4 mile. The area that I would go to was a picnic area with a restroom and a barbecue. There was a decent walking trail the deeper you go into the site. On that particular day, I felt a sense of doom and danger as I was going up the small hill and driving into the parking lot. I was pretty uncomfortable, but ignored these feelings. I got out of the car and leashed my dog. She wasn't her usual self. She is usually so excited you can hardly leash her. And as we started walking towards the trail, she wasn't walking out ahead on point like she usually does. The uncomfortable feeling grew, and there were no sounds whatsoever in the woods. Typically, there are birds chirping, animals rustling in the brush, and squirrels visible. My dog began to walk slower behind me, staying close to me. The feeling was that danger got worse, and I felt like we were being watched. I decided that I was having these feelings for a reason and turned and walked quickly back to the car. I had a feeling not to run. I watched all around carefully as I opened the tailgate to put the dog back in the car, as I thought that would be the time to attack. I didn't even take her leash off, just got in and locked the doors and drove away. I never went back to that park again. I went to the cold place when I was 11. I frequently experienced unusual and lucid dreams during my childhood, but this particular occurrence was beyond my comprehension. One day during summer break I had an experience right before falling asleep. I was falling into a hole when suddenly, I was grabbed by something that felt like solid, wet arms. I was overwhelmed by fear at the moment, but I awoke. When I got up, I still felt the same fear, but it was now combined with a sense of paranoia, as if someone were watching me. I must have woken up at 5 a.m. because it was dawn and my window blinds were all open. But it wasn't like a dawn I've ever experienced. The sun had a blue tint to it. Everything was shrouded in blue light. This was Phoenix, Arizona, in the summer of 2007. On top of all the blue light, it was extremely cold. Like Flagstaff, dead of winter cold. I walked around my house to find that my family and pets were missing, and I noticed all the blinds in the house were open. Confused, I walk outside to see that all the cars are gone too. Not only were my family's cars missing, but all the cars on my block were gone as well. There were no people walking around, and when I looked close, I noticed that all the houses in my neighborhood had their blinds open too. I even looked into my neighbor's house to see if anyone was in there, and I couldn't see anyone. Now this wasn't a lucid dream because I couldn't control anything, I couldn't walk through objects, and I couldn't wake myself up. I went back inside my house and noticed that the only thing working in the house was a wind-up clock stuck on 5 a.m. I sat in that world for probably an hour until I heard a loud rumbling, like intense rumbling, like it could have been made by a giant machine. I ran into my bedroom and lay down and closed my eyes, and then I woke up and everything was normal again. Blinds all closed and no more blue light. All the cars were back, but I checked the time and I saw it was 5 a.m. still, but this time the clock was moving forward. I go into my living room to see my grandfather sitting there, and he is shaking. I initially thought my experience was just a dream until I asked my grandfather what was wrong, and he explained that he had gone through the same exact thing while he was sleeping. After that we were sure we just had the same dream, but we both called it the cold place for 10 years, and we didn't really like talking about it but only as an inside joke. When I was 9, I saw things I'll never understand. When I was 9, I was living in this really nice raised ranch-style house. It was this perfect shade of blue outside and a mix of cream color, a little bit of gray, and nice carpeting all through the house. My room was in the basement, across from my brother's, who was in Iraq, and the bathroom and laundry room. Both were equally creepy rooms to be in alone. No matter where I went other than my room or the living room, it always felt like there were eyes on me. It also didn't help that around this time we had found out that a woman had tried to end her husband in their bedroom and had successfully ended her younger mentally disabled brother. And that young brother's room was, of course, my room. At first it started out as, "Mom, Dad, someone is watching me. I can feel it." Then they'd usually say it's just God watching over you, and I knew that they were wrong. For a short while things had begun to feel better, like the bad juju had been lifted. I could not have been more wrong. I was lying in bed one night sleeping while my parents were watching iRobot. Being a raised ranch, the bottom floor windows were elevated a bit off the floor, so if you wanted to look out of them, you'd have to stand on something. Right from the start I was having odd feelings of being watched and that something was going to come for me. I saw these shadows on my wall, and they were people. I saw definition in their actions as if they were standing right in front of the street lamp 15 feet in the air. Their movements were exaggerated, and they were pointing at me. Somehow, I knew they were looking at me. The silence was absolutely deafening, and I had never been more frightened in my life until I had stood on my bed and looked out my window and said, "No one on the street." I tried to be brave and tell them to leave me alone, but that just worsened it. I lay in bed and watched them in horror, knowing they were furious. Until I realized that the deafening silence was not silence at all but this buzzing noise right in my ear. I was paralyzed, I couldn't do anything but lie there in terror and pain. Suddenly the noise was gone, but now there was no noise at all, not even from my parents' TV upstairs. The only thing I could hear was this light vibrating, and something glowing faint green was coming from the hallway. I got out of bed to check it out and then ran to my parents. What I saw that night is something I still cannot understand to this day. At first, I didn't see anything as I walked out of my room until I rounded the corner and saw a triangle outlined in silver edging. It opened up, revealing a green swirling vortex inside. I couldn't hear anything, but there were these voices in my head pulling me closer to it. It wanted me to look inside. It had physicality, it was right there in front of me. In the doorways of the room stood solid black figures that were taller than the doors themselves. I sprinted upstairs, and at first I didn't notice, but something was pulling me. I didn't look back and ran to my parents. I had told them everything, and they didn't believe me. My dad thought I was a coward, and my mom thought I was crazy. I've had other paranormal experiences, but this one will always haunt me. Thanks for listening and hopefully believing. Where did that 1 hour go? This incident happened a year or two ago. My work schedule was 2 a.m. back then. On a daily basis, my alarm was set to 11:45 p.m. for the first ring and 12 a.m. for the second ring. So there was this one night when my alarm did its job to wake me up at 11:45 p.m. I snoozed first and eventually got up at 12 a.m., just I had always been to carry on with my same daily routine, take a bath, dress up, eat my food and a little extra time for touch-up. It was my daily goal to leave home at 1 a.m. for the trip. So I did, just like any other night. I took a bus, didn't check the time, because I was always confident I wouldn't be late due to the light evening traffic, and waited until I arrived at my workplace. Alright, so here's the weirdest thing. Just before I punched into the system, my colleagues asked me why I was so early. I gave them a confused look and checked the system time. It was like 4 to 5 minutes before 1 a.m. I didn't understand. I still don't. Where did that 1 hour travel time go when I left home at 1 a.m.? The alarm went off the same time I scheduled it. I did all my preparation before leaving home with no hurry. It was just like any other nights except that this one was completely strange. I have read about experiences that resemble glitches in the Matrix, and they resonated with me. I'm not sure, but somehow, that's the only closest thing I could ever think of. My experience at a park. When I lived in Missouri with my brother, we both worked at the same job. We worked as pinsetter mechanics at an AMF bowling alley. We didn't have a car, so we unfortunately had to walk 5 miles to work and 5 miles home every day. About halfway between home and work was a park, which, during the day, was a normal looking park, but at night, it was something very sinister and dark. One night, we had just closed up, and I started my walk home. I get a phone call from my brother, nothing out of the ordinary, just bullshitting with each other. I started to approach the park, and my brother asked if there was anyone with me. I told him I was alone and about to cross in front of the park. He told me not to go by the park and to wait there, he would come meet me. So I stayed and waited, and I saw him coming from the other direction towards the park to meet me, so I walked to meet him, and we met directly in front of the park. He told me that when he was on the phone with me, he heard a low and raspy voice say die, die, die on my end of the line. I was shocked and insisted no one was around me. At that point we noticed a fog roll in from the back of the park. It became dead silent. No bug sounds, no wind, not a single sound. I became skittish, so I took out a pocket knife with a silver blade, because I fully believe in the supernatural and no silver is a weapon. As I opened the knife, the bolt holding the blade to the grip broke and the blade hit the ground. I stood there holding the empty grip of my knife. At this point the fog had encompassed the park and sidewalk. I reached down to pick up the blade and we both heard a very audible and loud cackle, like the witch from Wizard of Oz, coming from all around us and above us. I grabbed the blade and we both ran to get past the train tracks at the end of the park. As soon as we crossed the old tracks, winded, we both look back and are shocked because there's no fog in sight. It's a clear night and the moon and stars were shining down. We both stared at each other puzzled, making sure we both saw and heard what we did. We kept walking our way up a hill, just after the tracks, and crossed in front of a church. When we hit the church, I felt this pain in my shoulders and almost felt like claws were gripping my shoulders and then ripping away my skin. I fell to my knees, completely exhausted, and my brother had to help walk me back the rest of the way home. To this day, my brother and I talk about this and are sure there is some paranormal activity happening at this park. I was at a gas station that sold farm animals, but it no longer exists. About a year ago I was leaving work and noticed that I was low on gas. I reside in a large city, which is significant, so gas stations are readily available at every corner. I decided to cruise around until I find one. So a minute or two later I see one that looks like a normal small gas station. I get gas and decide to go in to get something. I think it was car air fresheners, IDR. This is where it gets weird. The front of the store looks like a regular gas station, except for the people inside. The clerks and the customers are wearing things like they're in a Midwestern movie. They're kind enough to me. Then I move to the back of the store. There are cages with small farm animals, rabbits, baby chicks, a baby goat. Mostly chickens and chicks. I love animals, so I'm ogling them, and eventually the strange dressed clerk comes up to me and asks if I want to buy some animals for my farm. Note, there are no farms within the limits of my city. I say no and ask him if I can hold a chick. He cheerfully tells me it's time to clean their cages anyway, asks me to extend my crossed arms, and starts piling like 20 baby chicks on me. Wipes down the cage, puts them back one by one. No chicks were harmed during this glitch. I'm a little weirded out but happy that I got to hold chicks, so I pay with cash and leave the seemingly small gas station. The next day I tell my coworkers about it. They say there is no such place nearby. We even searched maps, but they showed no results matching the description, only a vacant lot where the gas station used to be. After work, I drove in that direction and found no such gas station, only the vacant lot remained. I described the place to my friends on Facebook, and they tell me there are stores like that in the outskirts of the city, 60 or so miles away from my work, where they sell animals, but they're not gas stations. To this day I don't know what happened. Did I end up in an alternate reality? Or a different time and place? I wish I had taken some pictures, but my hands were full of baby chickens. What a weird glitch. My brother vanished into thin air. Something very strange happened to me when I was around 14. I am now 42, yet I have always remembered this. One morning I woke up and, as always, went next door to my brother's room to wake him for school. I was shocked to see he wasn't there. His bed was empty and the duvet was positioned as though he had jumped out of bed in a hurry. This was very surprising to me, as he was so lazy, and it was very hard to get him out of bed each morning. Anyway, I searched his room, the bathroom, downstairs, and basically everywhere I could to no avail. I returned to his bedroom, and I genuinely thought he must have left during the night to see a friend or something. Anyway, imagine my horror when I saw him lying there absolutely fast asleep. I was shocked to my core, to say the least. I woke him in a panic, and he was angry, saying I had woken him from this amazing dream where he was flying. We often speak about this story, and it really baffles me. An unusual night drive to a local hospital takes me miles out of the area to a secluded wooded neighborhood. I have no memory of most of the drive and eventually reached the destination to discover I had narrowly missed being in a multiple vehicle accident. A few years ago, while winding down at night, an old friend contacted me on Facebook Messenger to inform me that he had been admitted to the hospital due to complications from a medication that had significantly slowed his heart rate. I expressed concern, and asked a few questions, and he assured me that he was generally alright, mostly bored and craving a burger. Once I realized he was serious and even specified In-N-Out as the best late-night option, I offered to pick one up for him and pay him a visit. I don't live far from the In-N-Out, probably less than 2 miles. And the hospital is just a few miles away as well, off a main street in downtown. I ordered the food, and despite being aware of the situation, I jokingly entered the hospital address into my GPS and proceeded on my way. It's important to note that I have lived in my city for 11 years, am very familiar with the GPS community in this area, and consider myself a proficient navigator. I mostly use GPS in town to test my knowledge of quickest routes, get traffic updates, and play the Beat the GPS ETA game. It's the little things that bring me joy. Here GPS is where it gets bizarre and also where the details get hazy. I drive. And I drive some more, and I keep driving. I recall very little more than a blissful night drive, just me and the road, no traffic at all, as I made my way up into the winding, tree-covered hills, with only one fleeting intermittent amused thought of, well, this is an inconvenient location for an emergency room. The ambulances would have a tough go at these narrow curves, I'm sure. And I drove on, smiling, enjoying the unexpected luxury of breathing in the fragrance of redwood trees. I followed the GPS voice's guidance from one small secluded street after another until I heard you have arrived. At this point I stopped to take in my surroundings, grateful to no longer be navigating the ever-winding roads in nearly pitch darkness. I looked to my left and saw only a large home that was by no means a hospital. The street was a dead-end/cul-de-sac, and it was so very dark. I sat in my car in a dazed state of confusion for a moment. It was like waking up from a nap after the sunset, a bit disorienting, though physically relaxed. And then, rather suddenly, every cell of my body was alert, and I realized the absurdity of this situation. I was in the middle of nowhere nearly an hour later and had no idea when I veered so off path, and more importantly, why I had realized sooner. I mean, I could not believe I had so blindly followed bad directions. Most strange, in retrospect, is how easy breezy I handled the whole thing, never once getting irritated, frustrated, or scared, but rather joyfully accepting the oddness of it all. Not exactly in character for this Virgo. I looked at my phone again and verified that I had typed the hospital correctly. No typos were found, but I was frustrated and wondered if a doctor's personal address had been listed by mistake. I had no rational explanation for my failure to notice that my rationalization was in the city center. I had a hearty laugh at my own expense, took a screenshot, texted a friend, and located the correct address and proceeded to drive back into civilization. As I reached the hospital driveway entrance, I noticed several flashing lights. I assumed it was an ambulance pulling into the ER, but as I got closer I saw police and paramedics in the street. Closer still, I saw debris spread out across several lanes and what looked like at least 3 totaled vehicles. As I waited to see if I would be directed away or allowed to enter the driveway, I got close enough to see blood on the street, and I asked a paramedic what happened. He told me that just an hour ago, a grave accident had occurred involving multiple vehicles. It's critically injured. I wondered aloud whether or not they had been rushing to get to the hospital when it happened and said a little prayer for the folks involved. He allowed me to pass over the mostly cleared pavement to the entrance, and as I did, I was suddenly covered in goosebumps and flooded with gratitude for having narrowly missed being involved in that catastrophe. I still have no idea what exactly happened that night. I know my friend received a citation. I got a good story and possibly a second chance at life. I know this was a long one, so thank you for getting it this far. Feel free to ask any questions. Furniture moved and doors disappeared. Okay, this is the first time I'm sharing this publicly, but here it goes. When I was around 7, we had guests visiting, so my 2 brothers and I shared a big bedroom. There were 2 beds and 1 fold-out cot. Everyone went to bed, and all was normal. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, my brother woke me up, freaking out a little, and said, "Something's not right," and told me to look around. When I looked around the moonlit room, all the furniture was moved all over the place. Including the bed I was sleeping in. Note, I'm a super light sleeper, and this was a heavy bed. I then got up, wandered around the room in awe, trying to figure out how my brothers could have moved all this heavy shit. They were only 8 and 10, and me without me waking up, assuming this was an elaborate prank at first. I looked over and saw my other brother asleep on his bed, which was now on the other side of the room as well. Dressers were all off the wall and in the middle of the room. Basically, everything was in a new place that made no sense. I told my brother we need to wake up our other one, and he didn't think that would go over well because he would freak the duck out, so we decided not to. Now, I know what you're thinking at this point. It's not rocket science, you got pranked, but this is where things get way weirder. My first thought after seeing the room was that we needed to turn the lights on. One problem with that. The switches were completely gone. Yes, as in they disappeared. So now both of us are starting to freak out. The only light we had, which was actually pretty good, was the moonlight coming in through the windows, as well as a street light that gave us decent visibility. Either way, this was the point, I knew it wasn't a joke. But wait, it gets weirder. At this point we just needed to get out of that room. Something was definitely wrong. We both looked for the door, searched all the walls, and found that it was gone as well. We were now trapped and losing it at this point. Not only was the bedroom door gone, but the closets as well. This went on for about 5 minutes. We tried everything. Pushed on walls, ran around in circles yelling, there was nothing we could do. At the point of almost giving up. Totally perplexed and confused, I turned around, and the actual door suddenly reappeared, on the wall that I had just searched and run my hands across. My brother took advantage of the opportunity and rushed into the hallway to the top of the stairs, screaming to our parents, whose bedroom was downstairs. My mother rushed to the bottom, asking why we're going crazy with guests in the house in the middle of the night. When we told her what was happening, she didn't believe us. We told her to come look. Note, this all happened in about 10 seconds, but when we both turned around and looked back in the room, everything was back in its original location. This included my other brother, who was still sleeping like a log on the cot. Anyways, today me and my brother are professionals and he chooses not to talk about it with anyone but me behind closed doors. When I mention it, he gets uncomfortable, sighs and shakes his head and doesn't really want to revisit it. I know many people have experienced objects moving around, but the complete disappearance and reappearance of doors and light switches for multiple people is a different phenomenon altogether. That was some crazy shit, and I hope I never run into something like that again. This experience has left me with many unanswered questions. I'm fairly sure I'll never get answers to those questions. Was it ghosts playing, a dimensional rift, mass hysteria, or alien abduction? Haha, I have no ducking clue. Also to note, I'm not religious, a science nerd and pretty skeptical about the supernatural, paranormal stuff, but yeah, that's my story. If anyone has any thoughts or similar experiences, I would love to hear what you think. I haven't been able to stop thinking about this since it happened. I'll get right into it. Anyone from my area might know of a theme park that's owned by Six Flags. It's probably the only theme park out in this neck of the woods. A couple of years ago they added a new ride that's basically just a big vertical arm with free rotating seats on either end. I finally got to ride it around the time it opened. It was really fun. While I was on this ride, it had to make a stop as part of the normal procedure to allow people to get into the car on the opposite end of the arm. I'm sitting up top, and I look out over the park, enjoying the view from up there. I glance at one of the other rides below. It's been there since I was a kid, and probably longer. It's a simple ride, just a tiny car on a predetermined track, a little kiddie ride. I remember going on it as a kid and started reminiscing about those days. Eventually the ride I'm on continues its cycle and inevitably ends. I get off, and I see a kid skipping and hopping toward the ride, with two people behind him, with one that looks strangely familiar. I turned around in a double take, and all three were gone. They didn't disappear around a corner, there hadn't been enough time for them to close the distance from where I walked past them to the ride. They were just gone. It wasn't until later, looking at some old Christmas photos of my dad, that it hit me, that's why that one person looked so familiar. If I had to guess who the other person was that I saw with my dad's past self that day, they were probably my uncle. This moment has been stuck in my head since then, and I'm honestly not sure how or why this happened at all. Supernatural encounter or rift in timelines? Okay, so I have this theory, and I don't know where else to share it but here, and I hope this makes sense, but let me give you all some lore first. My friend, partner, and I all moved into this old cabin built in Maine between the late 70s and early 80s on a lake. We haven't experienced much here except for the last few months off and on. It's happened 3 times to my friend. She will hear me talk. However, my voice always sounds far away or distant to her, yet she can still hear it. She has thought I was home but would later find out I wasn't. Now this is important to note. The times I wasn't home, I had a choice to be and chose not to. I had considered going home but changed my mind at the last minute. Tonight for the first time I was joking with my partner, and when he was talking I heard her say a phrase and laugh at us from her bedroom. I just laughed in response, mostly because I thought my boyfriend expected her to come out as she usually does to say hello and chat. I texted her about dinner, and she replied that she wasn't home. We have such paranoia over mimics, but then as I sat on the porch, I started to wonder, what if it's nothing paranormal but more of a timeline we are close to? Like what if the other versions of us and this timeline version of us are all living in this house at the same time but are making slightly different choices, and maybe these moments where we almost choose to stay or go create some weird rift. So, maybe I'm hearing the version of my friend from the other timeline and she's hearing us and we're simultaneously freaked out thinking it's ghosts when really it's just another version of each other, and for some reason the veil thins in weird moments of choice so we end up hearing each other? I'm so sorry if this explanation made no sense. I'm trying to find a better way to describe it but have fallen short. Anyway, I'd be curious to know what you all think. Colder than the spring I knew. So, this happened around the very young ages of 4, 5, 6, maybe? I'm 15 now, so this story is a tiny bit blurry but it still feels like it happened yesterday. Anyway, to set the story up, I will explain the layout a bit. At that age I lived in Dallas, Oregon, in the United States. We had a huge side yard, which at the time, had very green grass, that was separated from my front lawn with extremely tall and thin birch trees. Our side yard was also blocked off from a creek with these blackberry bushes that made it hard to see past anything after a certain point of walking up the street that ran horizontally from my house. One day during late spring, I was wearing a pink dress and no shoes, wandering around outside, which was how I spent my free time. In any case, I wandered through the side yard, and as I did, I made it to the aforementioned road that was just past the blackberry bushes. However, as I stepped out, the scenery changed. It was no longer the spring-filled street I had expected to see. Instead, it was completely gray and covered with a thin layer of frost and snow. The street drains were very clearly iced over with blue icicles that dripped into the underground maze of tunneling rainwater. The cars along that road sat still like they hadn't been touched or even seen in years, with this gray-blue hue that blanketed the entire area. The color was ubiquitous and pervasive. I stared up that street for a very long time, taking in cold breaths that I could see in the air as I exhaled. I even walked up the street and looked around to see what would happen. However, there was another eerie detail about the experience: the trees were still in bloom. The grass was gray and there were no flowers, which is unusual for an Oregon spring, but I distinctly remember the cherry blossom tree in my neighbor's yard still blossoming. Even so, I still have a few very strong feelings from that experience that resurface whenever I think about it. 1. That I shouldn't have been there. 2. That I wanted to stay. And 3. If I didn't leave, something may have happened that I shouldn't have been a part of. I remember my mom calling for me and the reluctance I had when I tore my eyes away from it and made my way back to the house. I looked back at the street, and it was normal. I was trudging through the long green grass as I did before, and no one else saw it. Additionally, I noticed footprints on the ground where I had walked before re-entering the side yard and running back to my mother. Even though this happened a long time ago, every detail stuck with me like it happened yesterday. I've even told my mother about it, but it doesn't seem plausible. Thanks to that and a whole plethora of different unnatural happenings, I have a very open mind about the unordinary. Did we enter another dimension? About a week and a half ago, I, my manager, and another colleague of mine were driving around at 1 a.m. to try and find somewhere we could get some food at a drive-thru. Every 24 hours McDonald's appeared to be closed, so we ended up driving 30 minutes away to try and find somewhere that was open. Eventually we gave up and pulled up at a service station around 2 a.m. It was eerily quiet, and we weren't even sure if it was open due to COVID, but we got out to check anyway. We walked through the doors, which were mostly closed, except for the toilets and a small shop that had one lonely worker sitting behind the till. All the fast food places were shut, lights off. We used the toilet, and my manager remembered that there was another part of the service station across a bridge that might be open, so we went to look for it. We found the walkway connecting to the bridge up 2 flights of stairs. The bridge was covered with windows surrounding the outside, showing a view of the motorway beneath. My manager said that the bridge was giving her the creeps, and I had to agree. It was long and narrow and dimly lit, with nobody else around. We decided to run as fast as we could to the other side. Honestly, it was unsettling. We made our way down the stairs at the end and were met with dead silence. Once again we were faced with closed restaurants and dim lighting. There wasn't a single other person around, and we were walking aimlessly around a large unoccupied space, a feeling of unease settling in. We couldn't take much more of the creepiness, so we ran back up the stairs and back across the bridge as fast as we could possibly manage. We caught our breath once we were back to the other side and commented on how strange the area had been. After that, we got snacks from the single open shop and walked back to the car to have a smoke. But the odd chilling feeling remained with us. We all agreed that we felt as though a lot of time had passed, despite the whole thing taking only around 20 minutes. The car park was empty and the air felt off, like the pressure had shifted. That's the best way I can describe it. We went home and tried to sleep it off, but things were still off when we woke up. Since then, the world has felt off to all of us. Colors look different. Nothing feels normal or right. Things are the same and yet completely different. It's hard to describe, life just feels more like a dream, and we all have a sense of being there in our day-to-day life, but not being present. We struggle to connect our minds to our physical bodies and be present in the moment. It sounds crazy, but it's been a very real experience for all 3 of us. We all agree that this started when we left the service station that night. Then the really weird thing happened tonight, and this is the moment I decided to hop online and try and get some clarity. So far, Google has nothing for me. Anyway, tonight we were dealing with some very serious issues concerning a friend who is struggling significantly with her mental health. We left her with the police, and my manager and my colleague and I set off driving home. We discussed that night at the service station again, noting that all the bad things that were happening with our friend and her mental health started after that. Other unpleasant events had followed as well, and we pondered the significance of our creepy adventure and the bad things that were happening now. I said, it's like since that night, nothing has been the same, and then the weird thing happened. We both started crying simultaneously, as if someone had turned a tap on for both of us. Water started leaking out of our eyes at exactly the same time and we were so freaked. I felt a wave of sadness and emotion, but it wasn't enough to make me cry, and my colleague never cried. Ever. We are now more certain than ever that an event occurred that night, we simply do not know what it was. We've joked about ending up in another dimension, and I don't normally believe anything like that. However, this situation has led me to question everything, as I am genuinely convinced that something is amiss, that we have encountered something that has altered all 3 of us. We just don't know what. Even as I write this I feel off and a tad tearful, I have no idea why. If anyone could shed some light on this I'd be really appreciative. Thank you so much for listening. A tiny, loud vortex of swirling air passed by me. This is an odd, unexplained event that happened to me, and I hope this is the right place to share. Some details first. I live alone in a rural area. I don't wear glasses, do drugs, take medication, or have a habit of seeing things. I don't have any neighbors within a few hundred yards. I am always very alert to my surroundings and think logically. I was about 40 when this happened several years ago. Sorry for all the small details, but I want to be clear about how alert I was and how real this was for me. It was a clear summer day, with no wind, blowing leaves, crazy wounded insects, or stray fireworks in the area. I walked out my back door that goes into my open-air carport. My car was parked half under my carport with the rear of the car outside. I was walking towards my car to go to my workshop behind my house, and I clearly heard a loud hissing sound that was coming from the ground behind or near the back of my car. The first thing I thought when I heard it was that something was on fire, maybe like something letting out pressure or leaking. It sounded like a small propane torch, or for you firebugs, the sound when you spray and light WD-40. It was loud, clear, and moving. I reached my left rear tire and began to look under the car. Although I could not see anything, I could tell it was moving towards me because the sound was getting louder. Whatever it was seemed to mimic a dust devil, but on a miniature scale, without the dust or visible debris. I could follow it as it went past me, though, because of the sound, about 5 feet from me. This all happened within 20 feet and maybe 10 to 15 seconds. This invisible spinning object reminded me of one of those ground fireworks spinners we used to ignite during our childhood. They remained on the ground and spun rapidly, emitting sparks and producing noise. This was just like that, but no smoke or sparks. The sound was clearly a spinning sound, and I could see a slight disturbance about 6 inches in diameter and maybe 8 to 10 high as it slowly went past me, like a distortion in the air. As I watched in complete disbelief, the spinning vortex thing went about 15 feet from where it started and into the grass. It hit the lawn and left a swirling path of blades of grass, then fizzled out about 3 feet later. I followed it as it went past me across my stone driveway, and I was looking right down on it as it hit the grass. There was absolutely nothing there. I spent about 10 minutes on my hands and knees in the grass looking for what caused it. I thought maybe I would find a large insect with one wing missing that was flying out of control, or maybe the remains of something that was burning or on fire. I would like to think there is a logical explanation for this, but for the life of me, I cannot think of one. In case people say it was maybe this or that. My tires were fine and no air leaks. No kids, animals, or birds around. No aerosol cans leaking, fumes, or smoke. Maybe a miniature tornado, an unknown air phenomenon, or a failed wormhole, I just don't know. You weren't supposed to find this place. A mysterious portion of my favorite playground disappears. There are a lot of wooden playgrounds in the area I grew up in, the sort with lots of tunnels, bridges, and towers. You've probably been to one like this near you. Anyway, what some might consider the king of such parks, a 40-foot tall, 8-story play palace called Kids Castle, was about 45 minutes away from my house while I was growing up. On the rare occasion that I got to visit, I would spend hours crawling around and exploring the endless tunnels in this 40-foot tall play palace. There must have been approximately 200 or more distinct passages, all interconnected by slides of varying lengths. It was truly a paradise for a child like me. A lot of other kids I met there would tell me there were secret passages in the castle, so I spent the majority of my time trying to uncover them. Once, when I was about 10, I think I did find one of these secret passages. It's strange, though, the circumstances of my discovery, the place I found, people I met there, and what happened after just don't make any sense. I made my discovery one sunny day on the first floor of the castle. I'd been walking around through the tunnels. The first floor had the highest ceiling, making turn after turn, when I walked into a clearing in the structure. The area was enclosed within the castle, but the sun was shining down on the ground into a pit of sorts. The pit had stairs down to its wood-chip floor and benches on either side. On the benches were 2 girls, both staring at me in disbelief. They both looked older than me, maybe like 13 or 14. "How did you find this place?" the closest girl asked. I explained I'd just been wandering and found it randomly. She explained back that I wasn't supposed to be able to find the pit. Her dad built this place and had made the area special for her. She made me pinky swear, a novel idea to me at the time, to never tell anyone about it, and asked me to leave. I complied, figuring that I could easily find my way back. I ran out of the castle to find my mom and tell her what happened. Pinky swear be damned. We returned and searched the entire first floor but found nothing, no trace of it at all. The pit just disappeared. I've asked friends of mine who frequently visit the place if they have seen an area like the one I described, but they have not. I have returned to that location several times since then to search for it, but I have not been able to find it even once. It's by far the most frequent place to remember. The place is now shut down for renovations. I think I might have accidentally temporarily slipped into another dimension or parallel universe. Was it a dream or not? I don't know what happened. I don't know if I dreamed it or if it was even real. I don't want to seem crazy, but I think I, 17, female, may have jumped into another dimension or a parallel universe accidentally, temporarily. For context, my school is one of those schools that keeps students from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade. Each year, my school takes their students for a one-day-long camping trip to our school's summer camp campus. From 5th grade to 9th grade, The camp trips last 3 days. From 10th grade to 12th grade, only selected students who complete a specific course can go as camp staff, also known as camp leaders. Camp leaders are responsible for taking care of the campers and assisting the teachers with the logistics of camp games. I am a camp leader. I've been to that camp countless times, and I know it by heart. See, the camp has 2 sections named Mission and Emmaus. Since Mission is the biggest and prettiest section, our school always stays in Mission, never Emmaus. We've never been there officially. Except for one night, when I was a camper in 6th or 7th grade, I remember that night clearly. We were playing a nocturnal game with our game groups. Game groups could go everywhere in camp except for certain areas, like the Emmaus section. However, for some reason, our group ended up lost in the woods and found ourselves in what we thought was the Emmaus section. Since we've never been there, we were a bit confused. Oddly, the Emmaus section looked exactly the same as Mission, proportionally and aesthetically. The only thing different was that everything was inverted, almost like a mirror version of Mission or the upside-down version from that show Stranger Things. We thought we were in the Mission section, but we soon realized we weren't, because we came across a cabin named Alabama. No Mission sector cabins were named Alabama. We assumed this was probably the Emmaus sector. Somehow, we found our way back to the Mission sector and continued playing normally, not giving much thought. Years later, as a senior, I went back to the camp on what we call a senior camp program. We're all seniors, camp leaders or not, went to camp for one last time. One of those days during the camp program, I told my non-leader friend, Kate, about my experience in Emmaus when I was in 6th grade. She got excited and asked me if we could sneak out and go see the Emmaus section. We decided to go, as I was familiar with the route. After walking for approximately half an hour, we came across the Emmaus section. But it was completely different from what I've seen in 6th grade. The camp was way smaller and uglier, and the cabins were completely different. Needless to say, my friend was disappointed, and I was too. Then, hours later, I spoke to one of our teachers about this, and he said it was odd, because in the whole camp, there was no cabin named Alabama. He said I might have dreamed it. I couldn't accept it. My experience was quite real and I know it. I even asked one of my friends who was part of my game group during that year's camping trip, and he said he also remembered that night as clearly as me. We couldn't have dreamed the same thing, could we? Was it really a dream? What really happened that night? We will probably never know. If you have any theories about this, please let me know. This roundabout in my town is a wormhole. My county recently installed a series of roundabouts. It takes a while to get used to them, but they save time/gas, so I can understand why they did it. Most of them are acceptable, but there is one roundabout that I am convinced is transporting me to a different location. The first time I noticed this was about a month after they put it in. I live in a suburb of a bigger city, and my favorite sushi restaurant is on the outskirts of that city. You can take interstates, but it's a lot more relaxing to take the back roads. You turn off my road, then it's a straight road where you pass nothing but cornfields for about 15 miles, then this haunted roundabout where you take the first exit, and then 15 more miles of cornfields before you pull into the restaurant. I drove to the restaurant, ate, and then started my drive home. At the point where I should have been pulling onto the road in front of my house, I found myself back in the parking lot of the restaurant. At first I got out of the car and started walking up to the door, but then halfway there I was like, wait, I already ate. And then I started questioning myself. Did I eat? Did I hallucinate eating dinner there? And then I realized no, I remember being hungry before, but I'm not hungry now. I even considered asking the hostess if she remembered me, but then I thought it might look like I'm a mental patient. I went back to my car and drove home, and actually arrived this time. Later that day, I actually logged into my bank account, and sure enough, there was a charge for sushi. The only explanation that makes sense is that I spaced out. Instead of taking the third exit, I went all the way around the roundabout, returned to my original route, and then drove the rest of the way on autopilot. Since then, I make extra sure I get the right exit, but like 3/5 times I still end up in unexpected places after taking this roundabout. I was driving to a school once that was in the other direction from the restaurant, and I somehow ended up at the restaurant. I have never done this with any other roundabout. I swear this one is a vortex of some sort. People don't just disappear. This happened just before the pandemic. My husband and I were out walking our dog. It was about 8:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning. We live in a quiet area in Northumberland, and we were just approaching our house. As we crossed the road, we noticed 3 girls just ahead of us. I did think it was a little strange being Sunday morning and so early, and they were all dressed similarly, leggings, t-shirts, and all had long hair and flat shoes. But what was really strange was they were not speaking to each other, no noise, no laughing as you expect of young girls, They looked to be maybe in their 20s, but we did not see their faces. I thought they were probably coming back after a night out or something. They passed the entrance to our street. There are only 5 bungalows in a horseshoe shape with nothing at the back but fields. As we watched, they turned into the garden of the house next to our cul-de-sac. They went behind the wall that surrounds our estate. We followed, as the bungalow is owned by an old lady who lives alone. We were only seconds behind, but as we came around the wall, they had gone. The garden they went into is all open with nothing but fields at the back, so they had nowhere to go. We searched around the garden, they had just gone. The house still had the blinds closed, and we were so close behind them, they would not have had time to go into the house. We rushed back to our house, and I stood on the back garden table so I could see right across the fields, but they had disappeared. My husband was as shocked as I was, and we cannot explain where they went. There is only one row of houses, and they are well spaced out, and there are no houses, only fields, on the opposite side of the road. I think there has to be something really strange going on, maybe a portal or something. In my life, I've had 2 events that truly stand out for me as strange glitches in the Matrix. The first event, which is the lesser of the 2 and most susceptible to a mundane explanation, occurred during a hockey game. I got the puck and went on a breakaway. Time slowed to a crawl. Not all that weird. Adrenaline and whatnot. But what happened next was the weirdest part. I knew, in every fiber of my being, that I should do the exact opposite of the smart play. I knew if I took a shot from far back, it would go above the goalie's glove, hit the right post, and bounce in. I didn't just think it would. I knew it would. It was a feeling of total confidence in this course of action despite the fact that it was objectively a stupid call. Now, this wasn't an I should aim there kind of moment. I didn't even bother aiming my shot all that well. I just let it rip, and it played out exactly how I knew it would. It was probably adrenaline, but I don't think so. I've had a lot of big adrenaline rushes in my life, but I've never felt that feeling again. Second is more peculiar. One evening, while I was smoking on my deck, I observed a bear casually lingering in my backyard. When I stepped out, it ran. But it was impossibly quiet. It cleared the 6-foot fence without a sound and disappeared into the trees without making a noise. It was a thick forest, full of dead leaves, downed branches, bushes, and whatnot. You could hear a squirrel moving tens of yards away. If a 200-pound bear hurried out, it would have sounded like someone driving a truck through there. I live on the edge of the normal range for black bears, but I'd never seen one in the neighborhood, or even in the surrounding woods before. Nor had I ever seen any sign of them. No one else had either. I told my neighbors what I'd seen the night before. No one believed me. They said I probably saw a coyote or something and got confused in the darkness. A month later? Boom. A whole family of black bears moved in and was perfectly okay with people. They spent weeks just hanging around people's yards and whatnot. In that previous month, between my sighting and the family moving in, no one saw or heard of any bear sightings in the surrounding area. Coincidence? Maybe. It just seems like a very strange coincidence. This is especially concerning given that they appeared out of nowhere like that. People were constantly in those woods. Hunters went back there frequently enough, checking activity on the animal trails and whatnot. I've had a few events like that in my life. Thoughts that seem to manifest themselves a short time later. Sometimes it's as short as a few moments, like the hockey game, or sometimes it takes a short while. Some might call it simple coincidence. And they might be right. But I can't help but wonder if somehow thought affects reality. Portal experiences as a kid and teen. Lurker here. Last night, I read Hunter stumbles into Portal, and it reminded me of 2 experiences I had. One experience occurred when I was a child, and the other happened over a decade and a half later when I was 19, during an astral projection. As a young child, although I cannot recall the specific time or location of the incident, I do remember being alone for a period. Mostly focusing on the grass and a patch of either whitish dirt or rocks nearby. Most likely, this happened in Washington State, near Snohomish Valley, but I can't be exactly sure. I moved a lot as a young child. All of a sudden, I was looking at a blue circle in the air that looked a bit like a film of water in a circle. First, I poked at it, then went through. I found myself in a room with a lot of padding and cushions, as well as a young blue-haired girl nearby, who invited me to play with her for a while. One with green eyes, much like emeralds. The toys reminded me of shapes and letters that would light up when touched but would hang in the air if either of us picked them up or dropped them, instead of falling to the ground. Kind of reminds me of Minecraft's odd building physics, or a 3D game. Honestly, it could have been done with some sort of hologram, now that I look back at it in more detail. We progressed with a lot more toys, and I vaguely remember her being a lot of fun, but she suddenly looked really worried and started telling me to go out. Suddenly, a ladder began to form on one of the walls. Or, more likely, a hidden panel retracted, leaving the ladder visible? Makes more sense to me as an adult. She asked me to climb it. It was remarkably easy to climb, but she kept insisting that I had to hurry, and at the top, I found a hatch that was opening. I crawled through the hatch, but I suddenly found it difficult to move, and then I ended up back on the grass. Behind me was the location of the previous portal, but it had vanished. That wasn't the last I'd see of her, though. Decades later, I started projecting to the astral plane, using a radically different method than most people use to go there. A couple of months ago, someone who I've been talking about the astral plane with helped me realize that this method gives a direct link to the highest astral level, so to speak, rather than the far less, I'd say compressed or solid levels to which most people project. Flying, for example, is nigh impossible there under your willpower, and getting hurt will leave both your astral body and physical body, which we all experience, feeling the pain. The downside of the method, however, is that you don't stop having your astral body exist if you stop focusing on projecting it. I'd managed to get a job on this highest level and a rather pricey motorcycle that had a unique Spengler engine on it, which would last for 50 years before failing. After some time in the city I first wound up in, I went on a tour of the astral plane, hoping to discover why it was so different from all the stories I'd heard about the subject. At 19, I was curious, and it made sense to explore, right? Going the speed limit on a quiet highway, just driving down the road, suddenly I see a blue portal ahead of me, much like the one I saw as a kid, a few seconds before I go through it. Here's the terrifying thing for you all to contemplate. The next thing I knew, I was about 2 miles up, as a guess, overlooking a planet and a rather large lake below me. There was just enough air for me to scream my lungs out, but it was a long, terrifying drop to the lake below. Somehow, I managed to get the bike between me and the water enough that it took the brunt of the impact. The frame survived as did the engine, but a lot of the fairing and external components shattered on impact with the water. An old archaeologist who lived on the lake pulled me out of the water and helped me recover from the fall as well. I didn't know what had happened to leave me there, but in exchange for assisting him with some of his work, he agreed to help me transport the motorcycle's remains to the local blacksmith in the hopes that something could be salvaged, and he also offered me a place to stay since his grandkid had left him a few months earlier to join the local military. Honestly, the old guy was fascinating to listen to, telling all sorts of stories about adventures and his interest in archaeology on the astral plane, but I digress. A while later, we'd somehow managed to get the motorcycle in mostly working order, when he asked me to go with him and help him on a job. It wasn't too difficult, and since I owed the old guy my life, I agreed to help him, and we set off to some old ruins. A blue-haired, green-eyed young woman was looking around, trying to figure out why the runic telephone and an amplifier had malfunctioned. I'd like to refer to it as an amplifier, but I'm not certain if that term is appropriate for this context. Irregardless, the equivalent to the runic telephone, and its amplifier, had malfunctioned and stopped sending her mother's phone calls. We invited her to head with us and took her back to the old archaeologist's house. A few minutes after we left, some difficult to describe events occurred at the location, which effectively disabled everything there and prompted me to help her search for her mum for several months afterwards. I didn't recognize her at first, it honestly took years. But I eventually realized she was the same girl I had played with as a child. I thought you should know that her experience may be similar to his or very different. Things she did answer for questions about it were along the lines of there's a hefty price to be paid to have a physical body or move to the physical plane, while keeping quiet about what those prices actually were. Hopefully this helps you all a bit. I was on a walk through my local fields, and it went silent. Why? Basically I was walking home from work at 3 p.m. yesterday. It was warm and sunny and felt really summery. I decided to walk down a public footpath through some fields behind my house to get home. The footpath I chose happened to be one my granddad told me we don't walk down. I always thought he was joking when he said that. The first field was truly beautiful, the grass was knee-high, and one could see and hear numerous birds and insects, as well as distant sheep. It was really peaceful and felt lovely. The second field was the same, then I crossed a bridleway path to get into the third field. This is where it got creepy. To get to the footpath into the woods I was following you would have to walk down behind a huge bramble/weed thicket. I was walking and everything felt fine and nice until I was about to turn the corner to go around the thicket, and then everything went silent. And I mean everything. The wind stopped rustling the trees, and the sheep stopped even moving, their ears went up, and they looked terrified. The birds stopped as did the bugs. It literally felt as if someone had pressed pause on the audio. I never felt so much fear in all my life. I looked around to see if I could see anyone else or any predators, like a fox or dog, as I'm from the UK. That's the worst we get. I even checked the skies for a buzzard, but there was nothing. There wasn't even a bird or a fly in the sky. I turned around slowly and walked up to the sheep to get a better view of the field, but they didn't even move, they just sat there still. I then walked back the bridle way and slowly walked down there back to my local town. I wanted to run, everything in my body was telling me to run, but my head told me to just walk slowly and that everything would be okay. Once I was halfway down the bridleway, the sound all started again, although I was still terrified. My question is, why did that happen? What happened? And what caused it? This was yesterday, and I'm still quite shaken up now. I can't look out of my windows, as that field, if you go through 3/4 other fields, is joined up to a small alleyway down the back of my home. The council is planning to build on a few fields, including this one. I will say that I'm from southeast England, and I have never really had a problem with the fields around here. I have always felt very at home and peaceful. Blessed be. I had a parallel reality experience. I have always been interested in shamanism and recently completed a 2-year program learning various shamanic healing techniques. Besides being a very gifted and powerful shaman, our teacher was also very interested in the subject of parallel realities, and we had an entire class devoted to it. She had been studying and investigating the phenomenon for many years. She told us that once you become aware of parallel realities, you might start noticing subtle changes in your daily life that reflect this. She said we constantly shift between realities, but it's usually subtle. Think of it like back and forth between 2 radio stations. She explained that if you become aware and invite bigger experiences in, you might just find that you get very profound signs of this. She did not clarify what this experience might entail, so I was uncertain about her meaning, and I simply chose to disregard it. Frankly, the entire subject felt too far-fetched for me. Fast forward a few months later, I get home from errands and walk into my living room first thing, as usual, to check on my elderly dog, Hank, a black Shih Tzu. He was blind and arthritic and was usually sleeping in his tan dog bed in the corner of my large living room. However, sometimes he would wander to other parts of the house and get stuck in a corner or behind a chair or other piece of furniture due to his blindness, and I'd have to rescue him. Well, on that day, when I walked into the living room, I immediately noticed that his tan dog bed was indeed empty. Now this next description is in slow motion in my memory because it was so profound. Once I noticed that the dog bed was empty, I made my way toward that area first so I could begin scanning the nooks and crannies nearest to the bed and then go from there to figure out where the little guy had wandered. So, I walk right to his bed and then begin scanning the area around it. Just as I begin scanning the room, I'm standing right over the tan bed currently within inches. My 14-year-old daughter runs to me with my cell phone, telling me I just got a text. This distracts me very briefly, and I take the phone and glance at it, but only a split second, and then put it in my back pocket when I see it's not urgent. I then lift my gaze again to begin looking for my dog, and to my absolute shock, I realize my dog is in his dog bed, in a very deep and heavy sleep. Wait. What? How? It was empty. That dog bed was empty. And my dog moves very, very slowly due to his blindness and arthritis. There was no way he could have walked over and slipped into the bed, right under my nose, and fallen into a deep, heavy sleep in the 2.5 seconds it took for my eyes to gaze down at my phone. I was so stunned that I couldn't find the words to stop my daughter and ask her if she saw what had just happened. I was frozen and confused. I recognized that I had no means to explain anything to her, as she was not present in the room with me when the incident occurred. The experience was actually very upsetting to me for several days because I thought perhaps I was having a serious memory issue or had early onset dementia of some kind. I mean, I was truly freaked out by this and thought about it non-stop. I did not consider the possibility of a parallel reality until my next shamanic healing class a few weeks later, when a classmate shared a similar story about losing an entire chicken she had bought at the store. It had been in the fridge all day and disappeared without a trace, only to return the next day. I then shared my story, and everyone agreed that many of us were indeed having this experience. Perhaps our shamanism teacher opened up some kind of awareness in us about parallel realities. I have no idea what happened, but I'll never forget it. Clarence Street time slip. It was dusk, approximately 5:50 p.m., on Monday, the 1st of November, 2004. I'm 25 years old. It's lightly raining, and I'm at the bridge end of Clarence Street, Staines, Surrey, UK, walking home towards Egham after a day in the office. It's an old street, 4 lanes with a narrow median. The pavement, or sidewalk, as I will refer to it from now on, on my side is just wide enough for two people to pass each other, and it has an uneven, patchwork surface that often presents a trip hazard. Since it is the evening rush hour, I am one of very many people heading home. The road is busy with cars, and there are many pedestrians whom I have to avoid bumping shoulders with whilst avoiding the puddles. I look ahead to see a young woman walking towards me, about 15 feet away. She has long brown hair, wears a thick white sweater, and carries a black leather bag. She moves slightly to her left, and I move slightly to mine so we can easily pass. I glance down to check my footing, and in the exact moment that I look up, everything changed. The young woman vanished. Just popped out of existence like a glitch in a video game. All 6 or 7 cars that were in my field of view on this side of the road also vanished. Simply gone in a moment, along with the rain and the puddles. Even the ground is now bone dry. I stopped in my tracks, almost frozen to the spot. Every hair stood on end, and my blood ran cold. I snapped my head round to see if the young woman had passed me, though she would have had to have teleported if so. No, she wasn't there. Nobody was. As far as I could see, on my side of the road, there was now not a soul. Except, there was now an old man in front of me. A man who I can say for certain had not been there before. He was about 20 feet in front of me, with his back to me such that I had a 3/4 rear view of him. 75 to 80 years old, a hunched stance, messy gray hair and a bald spot. For fans of the British/Irish sitcom Father Ted, he looked exactly like Father Jack, at least from my perspective. He wore a slightly baggy and very crumpled, dark gray suit and black shoes. He was standing right on the curb in a rather odd way. His heels were on the curb, and since his feet were flat, leaving the toes of his shoes hung in the air over the edge in a way that almost seemed to defy gravity. I stood and stared at this man for a good 15 to 20 seconds, taking in every detail. This was no shadow in the corner of my eye. This man was as real as any. Notably, he was pointing towards the bridge. Intently pointing with an arm fully extended, and though I couldn't see his face, I could see his mouth was open. I looked hard towards the bridge but could not see anything of note that he might be pointing at. However, what stood out to me during this observation was that the other side of Clarence Street appeared completely normal and busy, indicating that if something spooky was occurring, it was not apparent to my fellow commuters. Most eerily, I couldn't hear any of it. All the racket of cars and their horns, people on the phone, was mute. All was dead silence, except for my own breath and subsequent footsteps. Well, whatever the case, I needed to pass this man. So, I stepped to my right and gave him a berth so wide my shoulder was rubbing the walls as I passed him, all the while keeping him in my peripheral vision, and decided in that moment that I would look round and look at his face as soon as I had passed. I wanted to see the nature of his expression. Was he sad, angry, shocked, or confused? Despite these extremely odd circumstances, he could just be an old man with Alzheimer's, lost and in need of help. Also, I wanted to see if he really did look like Father Jack. So when I was no more than 3 paces past him, I turned to look at his face. And he was gone. He vanished into thin air in the blink of an eye, just like that young woman. My blood ran cold for a second time. I was now the only person this side of the road, whilst the other side remained as busy as ever. There was simply nowhere for him to have gone. No cars to duck behind, no doorways to dash into. Nothing. I stood there for a while and took in the scene across the road. It didn't seem quite right. The colors looked more vivid than they should be, certainly compared to my side, which seemed so desaturated of color as to almost be in grayscale. These completely oblivious commuters seemed to move strangely, almost sped up. And everything looked a bit smudgy. As if all of this was the other side of a wall of wet glass. That's the only way I can describe it. What's more, it was clearly still raining on the other side of the road, while my side was bone dry. This divide, this apparent wall between realities seemed to reach all the way to the bend in the distance, right down the line of the median, which was less than 20 feet away, though, I got the distinct feeling that it was now inaccessible to me. Maybe it was the rising fear, because I felt the sudden need to get the hell out of there. I turned and walked briskly towards the corner of the street, feeling relieved to see traffic on Bridge Street, which appeared completely normal. I even made eye contact with a driver as I navigated through the cars, and this human acknowledgement provided me with significant comfort in that moment. I turned left on the other side and jogged towards the bridge before stopping to look back at where I had been. Barely 15 seconds had passed, but that part of Clarence Street, impossibly, was now completely unremarkable. The area was now populated with cars, as it should be, and the sidewalk was full of people marching home in both directions, apparently in the rain. Whatever it was that I experienced had either passed or could only be seen from within. As I stood there on the end of the bridge, I wondered what that old man, if he existed at all, could have been pointing so intently at. Not much had happened on that bridge in recent memory. But there was a deeply traumatic event from my childhood that stood out. When I was about 6, circa 1985, I was feeding the ducks with my mom and sister on the bank of the river, very close to the bridge. There was a sudden hullabaloo on the other side. Shouting and screaming. A young woman had climbed over the railings atop the bridge and was about to jump. Despite the pleading from those around, just moments later, she did so, fatally striking something hard on her way to the water. Amid the crying and wailing of onlookers, some ran down to the bank and jumped in to try to reach her, but it was in vain in saving her life. It was too late. I remember my mother trying to stop my sister and me from seeing it, trying to usher us away from the ducks and this horrible scene, but in truth we had all seen everything already. I don't know, maybe it's not at all related to what I think of as a time slip. Maybe it's not a time slip at all but some other inexplicable event. All I know is, I was young and fit, no alcohol, no medication, and I had an appallingly easy desk job which left me neither tired nor stressed. I wrote every detail of this down when I got home, and, though I have trod that same sidewalk many hundreds of times since, nothing like it has repeated. Childhood glitch. When I was younger, my grandparents had a home in a small mountain range about an hour from where I live, which my parents and I would often visit. This home is very old, the backyard is essentially a forest, and the electric and other utilities are quite dated. Occasionally, my parents would invite friends, and their kids, to come up and visit for a weekend or so. Once, I was up there with my parents, a friend, who I will call Laura, and her family. Laura's dad is an immigrant from Eastern Europe, and he spoke with an accent. Laura is American, she has no accent. So when I was playing there with Laura, her dad came up to us and began speaking in another language to her. Laura responded, also not in English. I was taking Spanish lessons at the time, and I remember it was not Spanish either. Once they finished speaking, it was a short conversation, Laura and I went back to playing. I wanted to know what they were talking about but was old enough to know that if Laura's dad spoke to her in another language, then their conversation was private. So I waited for a little while and asked Laura, "What other languages do you speak?" Laura looked at me with surprise. She told me she doesn't speak anything besides English. This in turn surprised me. I asked again, and she maintained that she didn't speak anything else. A few years later, when we were at the end of middle school, I asked Laura if she speaks any other languages again. She told me she was just starting to learn French that year. That and English are all she knows. I still swear she was speaking another language with her father. My husband and I drove through Mississippi, and we fell through some kind of vortex. My husband and I are newlyweds. We went to Florida for a family visit and drove back north Friday afternoon/evening towards our home in northwest Missouri. To clarify, we were driving towards Tunica for the night to break up the 17-hour drive and get some sleep at a fun hotel. Somewhere around Jackson is where things started to get weird. Our GPS took us on a shortcut off the highway. As the sun was setting, we went through a town called Vidon. This was maybe 7:30 or 8 o'clock. I remember telling my husband the town had a haunted vibe, or just some bad energy, and he agreed. We kept driving as the sun went down and things got very rural. Please understand, my husband and I are from rural Missouri and have lived across the country in some spooky places, including Atchison, Kansas, if you believe in the Devil's Portal or whatever. We are very used to being on a dark stretch of road at night. This was different than anywhere we've ever been. It felt like we were constantly turning in circles. For about 2 hours, we drove without the gas gauge on our F-250 moving at all. Our truck is brand new and gets moderate gas mileage at best. We stayed at exactly 3/4 of a tank for several hours. Typically we stop on a trip every 2.5 hours. Now the power of suggestion. We kept talking about how this didn't feel right. Every few hundred yards we would see houses, but none of them had any lights on. My husband said, "That's strange, it almost seems like the highway is abandoned. More lights should be on at 8 p.m. Next house we pass, every light is on." This happened multiple times. We would say we hadn't seen something in a minute and that thing would appear. We barely saw any other cars, but the 2 times we did, we saw a string of 4 cars exactly the same make and model driving in perfect proportion to one another. Some kind of white SUV. Okay, maybe a coincidence? It happened again. Like a glitch just a few miles apart. We saw another car with its hazards on. The hazards turned off immediately after we passed them. My husband only saw a couple of cars in the rearview mirror, but one followed us for a few miles. My husband described seeing it as a truck with LED lights one moment and a sedan with amber lights the next, then back to being a truck with LEDs. This was all in the span of maybe 10 minutes with no outlet for someone to turn off and get on again. At one point in the trip we drove through a small town before getting back on route. This was maybe another hour in at 9 p.m. We saw no people. Cars were moving and lights were on but no one was outside. We didn't see anyone in fast food restaurants or out in parking lots. We thought nothing of it at the moment, but looking back, isn't that strange? There were also no animals. Just a few bats. Being from a rural area, we keep an eye out for deer, raccoons, armadillos, or other critters when driving at night. We only saw one deer at dusk, and it wasn't moving at all. It seemed frozen. It was looking at us, but its ears didn't twitch, it didn't run away, it just stood perfectly still. Its head was also really small, but maybe that's just the deer in Mississippi. Speaking of animals, we travel with our lapdog. He's a senior pup, and he's ridden on my lap all over the country. He couldn't seem to settle down on these back roads. He whined and shifted way more than usual. I think the biggest thing for me was the chills I had the whole trip. Like tingling, instinct-type chills. Time didn't seem like it was passing normally. We felt like we were in danger. As soon as we got back on the interstate, everything seemed normal again. Animals, people, other cars, the gauges in the truck, and my uneasy feeling were all back to normal. Lights were on in businesses. People were outside. My husband, who is normally very unshaken, returned to his normal self. All of my texts arrived simultaneously. My mum had texted me about 2 hours earlier, expressing that she had a sinking feeling about me and that I needed to be safe, regardless of what I was doing. I called her and said for the last 2 hours she had a mother's instinct that something was just very wrong. I want to end by saying my husband and I are very practical people. He is in the trades and I am an educator and caretaker. We have both traveled the back roads of the country in all types of weather and at all times, and while we sometimes felt a little creeped out by the darkness, we were always fine. Our truck is also almost brand new and works well on long trips. We have taken it on a road trip through another rural area recently in Kansas, and all the gauges worked. As a science teacher I know the behaviors of flora and fauna well. While we are devout Christians, we are scientists and take a very level-headed approach to the supernatural. I believe that God saved us from the vortex or ley line we encountered while driving last night. Lastly, my husband and I acknowledge that we have both taken SSRIs in the past, but we would never harm ourselves or others. We love life. Disappearing person. This just happened about 15 minutes ago. I was sitting on my front porch. I have a large tree in my front yard, trunk is approximately 3 feet across. I watched a woman walking up the street, nothing unusual about it. However, when she passed behind the tree, she never came out the other side. I watched for a minute to see if she maybe just paused out of sight, but she never came back out either side of the tree. I even went upstairs where I could get a full view of the street, and she was nowhere to be seen. This is all no more than 15 feet from where I was sitting. Based on my view and angle, there was nowhere she could go that I wouldn't have seen her. It's a suburban neighborhood, a dead-end street. If she had walked straight away from me behind the tree, she would have walked into my across-the-street neighbor's front yard, nowhere to hide. I am baffled as to where this woman could have gone. Sharing my strange portal experience. About 7 years ago I saw 3 apparitions appear and evaporate before my eyes. I was sitting in my car around 2 to 3 a.m. waiting for my friend to come out of their house. Something caught my attention in my peripheral crossing the street in front of my car. There was no one out due to the time. I didn't have my headlights on, just some ambient lights from my car stereo. I saw a man walk in front of my car, made up of what I can only describe as white smoke. It was almost like a body made of fog with an image projected onto it. He glided smoothly across the street, but I could make out the details of boots. I could not see his face, it was hard to make out any details of him, though he was so close to me. He never looked in my direction, just looked straight ahead. As I was watching him, completely confused about what I was seeing, I saw 2 more apparitions also crossing the street. They were at least 2 to 3 houses away. The male figure was directly in front of my car. I would say he was only 3 to 4 feet away from me. Your mind can't really make sense of what you are seeing. You don't really feel fear, it was more of a complete bafflement. As he got to the middle of the street, he literally started to disappear in front of my eyes. From his head down, like steam evaporating. He was merely a torso with legs by the time he reached the middle of the street. I was completely frozen, confused. I have had strange experiences and heard plenty of creepy noises and felt strange presences over the years, but I had never seen an apparition of any kind before. As I was watching him slowly evaporate, he walked directly into a parked truck on the opposite side of the street and disappeared completely. At that very moment, as my mind was reeling from trying to make sense of what I had just seen, The music in my car went completely silent and the entire stereo shut off. That is when I actually got scared. It immediately got my attention off of what I just saw. I was frantically hitting the power button, off and on, still no sound. I had been listening to a CD at the time and can tell you exactly what song was playing when it all happened, Valley of the Sarus by Atlas Sound. I ejected the CD, put it back in, and changed tracks, still no sound. As I was hitting every button on my stereo, I finally went for the volume knob. It had been turned completely to the left, muting the stereo. It was an analog control, so it had been physically turned all the way to the left. That was when I went from confused to terrified. Whatever I had experienced, witnessed with my own two eyes, had just become a full-on poltergeist and turned off my stereo. Was it trying to distract me to draw my attention away from something I wasn't meant to see? Was it trying to cement the experience so I couldn't explain it away later? Our minds desperately try to make sense of things that don't fit into reality. With everything I saw and experienced that night, there is no rational explanation for any of it. That experience still completely haunts me, but I have zero doubt in my mind that apparitions, whatever they are real and also have an intelligence and an intent. There is no way you can truly convey an experience like that to another person. You can only truly believe in the supernatural when it presents itself directly to you. Over the years I have analyzed every detail of what I had experienced. Did I see ghosts? Did I witness a strange glitch in time, a portal? I even analyzed what song I was listening to at the time. It was actually a cover by Atlas Sound of a Joe Meek song. Meek was a pioneer in experimental music in the 1960s, and I had been a fan of his music for quite a while at that point. It wasn't until this experience that I decided to read more about Joe Meek and his life. It turns out in 1967 he ended his landlady and then shot himself with a shotgun. I had no clue about any of that tragedy or anything about Joe Meek's personal life with the exception of his music and his influence on experimental production. When I read about the incident, I could not help but feel that the apparitions were connected to the music I was playing and to those deaths. My experience took place in Los Angeles, despite the tragedy occurring in England. I would love to hear any of your thoughts about the incident or similar experiences. Do yourself a favor and put on the cover by Atlas Sound of Valley of the Sarus. The song itself is extremely haunting. Building appears out of nowhere. My spouse and I were driving home from the store tonight when I saw a store where, just last week, and for years previous, a vacant dirt lot had been. It was nothing out of the ordinary, a Verizon store, located in the far end of a shopping center we pass by at least once every week or two. For years it was nothing but an empty lot with dirt and scrub bushes, but not tonight. Now I know they can build buildings awfully quick these days, especially in the shopping center/strip mall style. But this building was not there last week, nor was it even under construction. It was a fully built, lit, operational Verizon store. It had customers, the inside was well lit, and it looked like it had been there for some time. I stopped our car at the stoplight and pulled over and asked my spouse if they had noticed anything about the building. At first, my spouse said, "No, it's just the Verizon store, it's been there for a while now." I asked, "How long?" They thought about it, then looked kind of weird, like lost in deep thought, and said, "No wait, that was just a field. That's where that vacant lot was. We just walked through that last week on the way to get a burger." I agreed, and my spouse flipped. They started demanding we just go home immediately, even though I wanted to go over and ask someone working there when the store had opened. My spouse was getting very upset, though, so we went home. They haven't talked about it much, and it's been a few hours now. I mentioned it before bed, and my spouse laughed it off, said we were wrong, or joked about it being a Mandela effect. They no longer seemed upset about it. I am thinking of going there tomorrow and still poking around, though, maybe finding out when the store opened. I'm not scared or worried, more intrigued. Any thoughts? Similar experiences? Help, have you seen the same thing as me? A week ago I was walking to the public transport station. I walked approximately 1.5 kilometers. It was 8 at night, and it was drizzling. To make my journey shorter, I passed through some alleys that connect the streets, but at that time and because of the rain, I was totally alone. As I was about to enter the first alley, I saw a man halfway down, illuminated by a motion-activated lamp. He was wearing a trench coat, black shoes, and holding a yellow umbrella. He never moved forward, nor did he turn around. Obviously I didn't enter the alley. I kept thinking he would move forward, but he didn't. After almost 1 minute of waiting, the man began to rotate the umbrella clockwise, but at no time did I see his body make any movement. The action amazed me, and for about 15 seconds, I watched it. Then I said to myself, "What is he doing?" and went to the main avenue, crossing the street as I normally would. I thought I would see the man leave when I got to the end of the street, but no. To this I want to add that the moment I saw him, before he turned the umbrella, I knew that he was not someone earthly. That is why I was intrigued. I am not afraid of that type of presence because I have one that is with me all the time. I see it and many people have seen and felt the entity that accompanies me. That is why I am not afraid to walk alone in lonely places late at night. But I would like to know if anyone else has seen this entity or if it was simply a vortex that opened momentarily. If you are going to make negative comments about mental health and things like that, as a criminologist I ask you to also share with me what study you are doing. Without further ado, I hope you can help me alleviate my doubt, because honestly I do feel very intrigued. Maybe I'm not crazy. At different times I've debated my sanity and possibly being haunted. At different times we've had things go missing only to reappear and duplicates appear at random. I lost the charger to my headlamp, flashlight, and looked everywhere for it, as I use it frequently at work but charge it at home. My wife and I searched the house thoroughly, but we couldn't find it. I come home that evening, and it's on the kitchen counter. We don't keep things on the counter, not even small appliances. It's completely bare, so it couldn't have been overlooked. My wife left before me that day and swore she didn't put it there, but sure enough, there it was, all rolled up nice and neat. I lost the key to our gate, which is a master lock key on a bright yellow ring that always stays in the cup holder of my truck. However, one morning I went out and found it missing, even though I had used it the night before. I searched the truck, the area near the gate, the house, and the laundry, and the key was nowhere to be found. About a week later I go out to the truck to leave for work, and there is my key on its bright yellow ring in the cup holder. At different times the barn door has been open in the morning when it was barred the night before. The door locks from the inside using a steel bar, and you must pull the door towards you while inserting the bar, otherwise, it won't lock properly. Often when the door is discovered open, the bar is found removed and set somewhere else in the barn. This is just a hay and feed barn, with no animals inside it. All the watches and analog clocks were about 5 minutes slow compared to the cell phones one morning. That was weird. Side note, I usually only wear old wind-up watches because battery watches seem to die within 2 or 3 months when I wear them for whatever reason, so I have a small collection of wind-up watches and a few quartz I've received as gifts, and all were consistently off. Last summer, I spent hours chasing the sound of cows through the woods, thinking that some had escaped, only to venture deep into the forest and find that the sound had stopped. Looking back, it was probably some kind of bird or frog, but it sounded just like cows. Every man in my father's line has been struck by lightning for 4 generations, including myself. Not sure if that's a glitch or just a weird coincidence combined with not knowing when to stop working in a storm. We have all survived, but I now experience a stutter and a fear of heavy rain. My wife was cleaning her closet last week and discovered 3 of the same college shirts from a school she went to 10 years ago. We've moved 3 times since then, and she's only ever had one of those shirts. I once found my identical truck an hour from home. I have a very distinct colored '69 Chevy truck that I painted myself, and while driving one day, I found what I thought was it in a spot I used to hike. It was so identical that I nearly called the police, thinking someone had stolen my truck. I got out to investigate, and I found that even the seat cover and tires were identical. The only thing that kept me from calling the police was being in an area without service and knowing I'd taken the carburetor off mine the week prior to the rebuild. When I got home, my phone was on, and my truck was still in the driveway. I took my wife out to show her the identical one, and it was gone by that time. My wife lost her AirPods, case and all, so after a few weeks we bought her another pair. When we got home, hers were on the kitchen table. I heard one of my hubcaps fall off on my gravel road, so I stopped to pick it up. I find the one that came off, and when I walk around the truck to see which one it was, they're all still there, so now I have 5 identical 57-year-old hubcaps. Possible vortex over Yuma, Arizona? I gave this a tongue-in-cheek title, but what follows is entirely true. I consider myself a sober, rational-minded person, and I honestly have no explanation for this. My girlfriend and I recently drove cross-country to move from Boston to LA. About a week ago, we stopped in Yuma, Arizona, to get some coffee at a Starbucks. A few seconds after parking, I realized I didn't have my keys. It seemed weird to me, but being an absent-minded person, I assumed I had taken them out and dropped them on the floor without noticing. I did a quick search and couldn't find them, so I grabbed the spare from my glove box and decided to look later. After all, they couldn't have gone very far since I hadn't even opened my car door at this point. We go inside, get our coffee, come out, and I do another quick search. Nothing. Oh well, I think they're probably lodged somewhere I can't see, but once we get to LA, I'll be able to conduct a better search. We get to LA. I look in every conceivable spot. Nothing. As a side note, the only reason this is really concerning to me is that I can't get into the trunk with the spare key and a bunch of our stuff is in there. I can't stop thinking, what the hell happened in Yuma? This morning, I was fishing through the snack bin we kept in the car during our trip for something to eat. I saw a black plastic bag, and I had forgotten what we'd put in there. I opened it up, and there were 2 bubble-wrapped ceramic cups we'd bought in Tucson and, you guessed it, my keys. I lost the keys within seconds of parking at the Starbucks. I hadn't moved from the driver's seat. This bin, in which I eventually found them, was in the back seat, underneath our cooler, and the plastic bag with the cups was inside the bin, tied up tightly. I should also note that my girlfriend definitely isn't the type to play pranks, and she's just as baffled as I am. So, possible glitch? What say you? Walking without leaving the place. I'm writing this story about an experience I had with a friend, hoping to find someone who has gone through something similar or can offer an explanation. Minimum hope, but not zero. So I am a stars fan. Whenever I look at the night sky, I am admiring them. That night, the sky was absurdly beautiful, so I suggested to my friend that we explore the bush, where we would have a better view because it would be darker. Nothing bad happened, it was just another normal night. We were just talking and laughing at jokes. We did not consume any drinks or other types of drugs. Until he said he was feeling a strange, very strong feeling and wanted to go home. I thought he had just been scared, and I was not feeling anything, so I suggested we sit where we were and stay right there. He accepted and sat down but then continued insisting that he wanted to go back. He wanted to go back, so I accepted. We had already walked a lot, none of us knew where we were anymore. I asked him to sit there where he was that I was going to look for some point of reference. That's when I saw that he really was not well. He begged me not to leave him alone, but then I convinced him that he was going to be fast. I said that I would be running. The stranger is that he is nothing like that. We always made things like this together, and he was never afraid of anything. It was not fear. So I ran out with the flashlight from my smartphone and went to a place that helped me understand where we were, and then I started to feel strange things too. Do you know that feeling when you're in a car, stick your head out of the window, and encounter a strong wind? That night it was not even windy, but when I started running, I felt this kind of wind on my face. As soon as I found it strange and stopped, and the wind stopped too. Then I went back running, and the wind also came back, but I ignored it. I felt that I was running very fast, but I knew this was not the case because the things around me were passing by at a normal speed. Then after a little time I saw a street with a closed store I knew. We were not so far from home after all, maybe 6 or 7 minutes walking, we would get home. Then I ran back to seek my friend, with the same sensation of the wind, and when I got there, he was in the same state. He said he just wanted to go home and could see his mother. He said he needed to feel love, but he couldn't explain. I thought he was crazy because I had never heard him have these conversations before, but now I understand. This is where I wanted to help him. I offered my wrist to assist him in getting up so we could stay side by side. We are side by side. We both started walking towards the street, and I began to realize something very strange. Neither of us was leaving the place. It was strange, the world around us appeared to be moving, yet we were not. It was a similar experience with walking on a treadmill, only the world was going back, but we were not going forward. I thought it was something from my head. It was very confusing because I was sure I had not drunk. It was a normal day. We both look at each other at the same time, and suddenly he says, "Dude, we're not leaving the place." I gave a loud laugh, but it was a laugh of relief because I was happy not to be the only one feeling it. So it was really happening. I said, "Let's run, it should work." We started to run, and I was no longer feeling that wind that I felt earlier. When we started running, the world was going back a little faster, but we still felt as if we had left the place. It felt as though we were moving very slowly. This feeling was passing by, more or less, until we reached his house. When we arrived, he was already a little better, and we laughed at what had just happened. Then I told him about the incident with the wind that occurred while I was running alone. We also told his mother, but I don't think she fully believed us. She is a Christian and she was saying that it was a demon thing, but we also doubt it. It should have happened about a year ago. I'm uncertain if it's a few months less or a few more, but it was about 1 year ago. Sometimes we comment about this till today when we hang out. 29 years ago I jumped to a parallel existence after a near-death experience. When I was 25 years old, I was driving home from work one night. I lived in Los Angeles at the time. I was driving west on Sunset Boulevard towards my apartment in Brentwood. For those that are not familiar with the area, there is an expanse of sunset, near UCLA, that is very curvy. It has 2 lanes on either side with no shoulder. It was 8:30 on a Saturday night, so there was some traffic. I was driving along and all of a sudden about 50 feet in front of me I saw a car, but I was looking at the passenger door. A car had spun out of control and was perpendicular in my lane. I didn't have time to stop. I looked to my right and saw there was a car next to me, so I had nowhere to go. I instinctively turned my car all the way to the right anyway. Once I had cleared the first car, I spun it all the way to the left, still trying to avoid the second car. While all of this was happening, I remembered a time with my mom at Disney World when I was 3. This experience is not a memory I have ever had. I vaguely remember parts of that trip, but this memory was not one of them. I realized then that my life was flashing before me and I was going to die. I had never been so sure of anything. Every part of me knew I was about to die. I started screaming. To this day I don't know if I vocalized anything or if it was all in my head. I yelled, "No, no, this isn't fair. I'm not done yet." All the while swerving all over Sunset Boulevard, I suddenly stopped my car, and I was now perpendicular in the opposing lane of traffic. I looked around and there was not a single car anywhere. It was like everything had been wiped clean. I put my car in reverse and proceeded home. I did not see a single car the rest of the way. I was only 5 minutes away from home at that point, but Sunset Boulevard on a Saturday night was completely empty. I got to my apartment and parked on the street. I didn't see one person. While walking to my apartment I came to the conclusion that I had died, and because I said no I was stuck in some limbo. I had never wanted my roommate to be home so badly. Unfortunately, she wasn't. I called one of my best friends and said, "I need to ask you some questions. Please just answer me and I will explain after." I asked her my name, my age, what city we lived in and the date. Obviously she was very alarmed. I explained that I thought I was dead and I wasn't sure I was really on the phone with her. She tried to convince me that I was alive and that everything was okay. There was no way mathematically to escape it. There was nowhere for the car on the right to go. This moment has haunted me my whole life. There have been times when I have questioned my existence. I've wondered if my life since has been a very detailed death trip and I'm actually lying on Sunset Boulevard bleeding out. After many years of meditation, spiritual practice and belief in quantum physics, I wonder what life I jumped into. Weird glitch with my dog. Okay, so this just happened last week, but I'm still so freaked out by it. I was getting ready in my bathroom to go out that night and realized I left my makeup in my mom's. So I went to go get my makeup out of her room, and when I opened the door, my dog ran past me out of the door, scratching his paws and barking as he went downstairs. I thought it was odd that my dog was trapped in my mom's room because that situation that I just described happens very often, but not with my cat. My dog is never kept in her room because he hates being separated from us and constantly barks and makes noise if he is left alone anywhere. So my first thought was that my mom was intentionally keeping him in her room, and I felt guilty for letting him out. After I grabbed my makeup, I went right back to the bathroom, and my dad yelled up to me, asking where my mom was. I said I didn't know, and he asked me, "Is she taking the dog on a walk?" Since we were all getting ready to leave, and that's the reason why we felt happy before we went out. I told him no, she couldn't be, because I just saw our dog run out of her room like 30 seconds ago when I let him out. My mom's bedroom is directly next to the bathroom, so this whole encounter took place in about 30 seconds to 1 minute. My dad said okay, but he was confused about where my mom was. About 1 or 2 minutes later, at the most, my mom walked through the front door with our dog. I was so confused and asked my mom where she was. She said she had been taking our dog on a walk to the store in our neighborhood and left about 15 minutes. I felt so scared and didn't know what to say to my reason. Because I knew I would sound crazy telling them that I just saw our dog a minute or two ago when I let him out of her bedroom. I genuinely have no idea what happened but haven't stopped thinking about this. Doppelganger? Dimensional rift? A few years ago my family decided to host my cousin's sweet 16th birthday party at a local church, renting out the event room. The party went on without a hitch, and by the time we were cleaning things up, it had gotten dark out. I was with my other cousin, not the birthday girl, moving boxes of party decorations to the car. We both stood behind the car, putting the boxes in the trunk, talking about the events that went on that night. We both started to head back inside. I went around the right side of the car, and she went the long way, around the left of the car. We should have met back at the front of the car by the hood at the same time. I fully intended to continue our conversation. Instead, I saw her at least 5 feet in front of me walking quickly back into the building. I followed her back inside, trying to catch up with a quick jog, but she was walking faster than I could jog. I followed her around the corner and watched as she entered the bathroom. Ah, that must be it, I thought to myself. She actually had to go to the bathroom. I stood outside the restroom waiting on her when suddenly, my cousin, the one I thought I had just seen walk into the bathroom, walked around the corner. She asked what I was doing as we had just brought out the last boxes. I didn't know how to reply. I needed to know who I followed, as we should have been the only people with access to the building. I opened the door and looked around, nobody was in there. I checked both stalls but found no one inside. I walked out and left with my cousin, locking the door to the building as we left. I forgot about this whole event until about a year ago, when I started getting into paranormal podcasts. A few things to note. Whoever or whatever I followed into the church looked just like my cousin from behind, with long black hair and an athletic build shorter than mine. It's a recognizable silhouette, even in the dark. When we re-entered the building, the dim lights revealed more than just its silhouette. It looked exactly like my cousin from behind, although it remained 5 feet ahead of me and moved very quickly, at a pace that was more of a brisk walk than a run. I am sure the bathroom didn't have any other exits, and after confronting my cousin late last year, she had no memory of this event, as it didn't seem out of the ordinary for her. It's been about 5 years. Something I also remember was the lights in the bathroom were motion activated and were already on when I opened the door to investigate. If you have any ideas as to what that could be, please let me know. I don't know what I saw, but it was some sort of portal. This happened many years ago, when I was around the age of 12. Even though nothing significant happened, the experience scared me so badly that I haven't mentioned it until now. I'm 33. No real important backstory. I was sitting in my living room, watching a movie with my family. I don't remember what movie. It was a tiny TV, as we were low income. My mom and dad were sitting to my right, sitting on a couch that was facing the TV. My brother and I were sitting on a couch that was at a right angle to the TV but closer, so my brother was also to my right, lying down to face the TV. I was sitting closest to the TV, squared to the couch, looking left to watch the movie. Out of ducking nowhere, there is some sort of movement on the wall our couch is sitting against, between me and the TV. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing, but it was easily within reach and super freaked me out. I remember that my heart started racing like crazy as I watched the movement swirl and expand into a purple and pink hole that seemed to lead nowhere. I don't know how else to explain it. All of a sudden, the wall looked like it had a hole in it, as if I could look into a different space if I tried. The space looked like it had some sort of pink-colored white noise, with a purple and black shimmering border, on our white wall. This all happened really quick, maybe 10 seconds, but probably way less. I looked behind me at my family to see their reaction to what was happening, but they weren't reacting. They were just sitting there watching the movie like everything was normal. They didn't even react to my freaked out look. They weren't frozen or anything, but it was clear that they weren't seeing what I was seeing, since the portal was about 4 feet from the TV and should have been very easy for at least one of them to see. I'm not even sure if they noticed me looking at them. If they did, they might have thought I was freaking out about the movie or something. I looked back at the portal and watched it for a few more seconds, holding still but super freaked out. I didn't look in it. I didn't touch it. I didn't see anything come out of it. What I did do was say in my head, "All right, I believe. There is no ducking way the paranormal doesn't exist. Maybe it's aliens, maybe it's ghosts, who knows what it could be. But whatever it is, please make it go away, and I will never question if the paranormal is real ever again." I thought a few more things I don't remember specifically, but they were pleased to be left alone and to go away. All this took place in under a minute. After a few more seconds, the portal shrunk and faded away. I looked at my family one more time, and they had the exact same look as before. I never mentioned it to them and just did my best to calm down and try to move on. Has anyone ever seen anything like this? Possible demon, portal, encounter. I want to start off by saying my sister Em has worked in nursing homes since she was 15, where she started out as a kitchen aide and is now a CNA at an assisted living/dementia care, where I worked with her. I've worked with children with special needs as a caretaker to a teenager with an undiagnosed autism spectrum disorder, complicated. They were going through genetic testing at the time to see if it was chromosomal, and doing brain scans to no avail of a diagnosis, and then started working with my sister at the assisted living/dementia care facility. My coworker S, who was also involved, has a grandmother who recently passed away but suffered with Alzheimer's for the past 22 years and a mother that works as an activity director for an Alzheimer's specific facility. Basically, we are all well aware of how people with Alzheimer's behave. I also trust the rest of my coworkers who talked about goings-on. Basically, it spans over 2 main residents. Kat and Mary. Kat and Mary lived in 2 apartments in assisted living. They moved in within a week of each other, Kat first, then Mary. This was a recently built building, and they were the first 2 people to ever occupy these apartments. Mary was from a religious family, Catholic, and was a diehard Tigers baseball fan. She had one son, a surgeon, and she loved his wife and doted on her like she was a daughter. Above all, she loved cats. She didn't bring them with her, but her daughter-in-law would bring in photos of her two constantly as they were living with her and her two cats. She had mental issues. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder as a newlywed and had been on medications for it. With the onset of Alzheimer's, she was having more depressive days, and the family wanted her to be in a facility so that when it worsened even more, she would be taken care of. Kat was born to a deeply religious, Catholic, immigrant family from the Czech Republic. She came over to the United States as a child at 7 and would tell us about coming through Ellis Island and seeing the Statue of Liberty for the first time. She and her husband owned a successful business, still being run by their children. At the death of her husband, she moved in to retire and not have to worry about lawn care or any home maintenance. She did walk with a cane, but more often than not carried it around and only used it outside. Within a few months of moving in, Mary started to get very paranoid. She stopped coming out for meals occasionally and insisted on staying in her room in her pajamas most of the time. About this same time, Kat is believed to have started having minor strokes as her behavior also became erratic. For instance, one day my sister and a coworker found her sunbathing outside in just her panties. They suggested she come inside and put some clothes and she complied. She chuckled and said she must have just forgotten to put her top on. At the 6-month mark of moving in, Mary starts talking to herself in her room. The conversations overheard involve her talking to someone, pausing for an answer, then continuing the conversation. Her son starts becoming very concerned and takes her for a psych consult. On leaving the facility and going to the doctor, she becomes her usual self. She does tell the doctor that she suspects someone has been spying on her. They attribute it to the third shift's nightly rounds, suggesting that they simply peek into her room instead of entering. Kat has a major stroke and is hospitalized. 8 Mos. Mary begins telling workers and family that there is a man living in her closet. She is described as being very tall and black like a shadow. She said he has a deep voice and tells her to do terrible things. She refuses to leave her room completely. A psych consult is called again, and Haldol is prescribed for regular use, and Ativan for extreme situations. Kat is still in the hospital. 9 months, Mary is being treated with the antipsychotic medications to no avail. One night, she is found crawling on her belly to the bathroom, claiming that a dark man is drowning kittens in the bathtub and that she must kittens in the bathtub and she has to rescue them. Her meds are increased, but there is no change in her delusions. Kat returns to our facility. She can still walk and talk but has issues controlling her left side. With therapy this starts to improve. However, her demeanor has changed entirely. She is now very mean and very anxious. She's prescribed antidepressants, and it's chalked up to being a symptom of the stroke she suffered. 12 months, Mary has fallen several times in an attempt to follow the dark man and his instructions. She is now pretty much bedbound. One night on third shift, my coworker, S, was working at the desk doing paperwork and updating med books. The camera feed that faces the hallway goes fuzzy. S looks and realizes there is a white moth on the lens. While S sits and thinks about finding something to bat away the moth, all the camera feeds go black and emit white noise. All the feeds then go black with the exception of the hall with the moth. It clicks back on and Mary is standing in the hallway, in just her nightgown, staring at the camera. S calls her fellow carer from a room and shows her the dead video feeds except for the one hall. Together they go put Mary back in bed. She doesn't fight them. They go into Mary's room, and her closet doors are open. It is protocol to have them closed, and they are rarely open anyway since Mary's pajamas are stored in her dresser. When they return to the office, all the feeds are back online. They report the issues with the monitors to maintenance staff, but since our cameras don't actually record, nothing can be done. This happens several more times over the next few weeks. Always a white moth, white noise, black feeds, and then Mary standing in the hall. Kat has started praying loudly at all hours of the day. She is seen facing her closet, clutching her rosary. She is diagnosed around this time as probable Alzheimer's. She is still very mobile and can speak. When asked why she prays so often, she would not respond. Another coworker, T, is a practicing Wiccan and naturist. She starts talking about how she thinks it's a portal to another world, or to hell. She claims that she senses a real evil in Kat and Mary's room. 14 months. Mary's daily routine is now lying in bed arguing with the man in the closet, as she now calls him. She insists he lives in there but also can come out of the ceiling vents like smoke. Plans are made to have her moved to the lockdown unit for those that need one-on-one care. I can't stress enough that these arguments she had sounded real. She would pause and look like she was actually listening to a response. Kat is also scheduled to be moved into our lockdown unit after refusing to stay in her room. She spends her days in the common room, then comes out at night in her nightgown with a blanket. She refuses to wear her denture bridge. She claims that the teeth are made from pigs, and if she wears them, she will go to hell. The management decides her Alzheimer's has progressed and she needs to be moved. 15 months. Mary has been living in Gold Hall for 2 weeks. She has not seen the dark man and comes out of her room for her meals. They tentatively stop giving her Haldol per her son's request. Kat is now moved into Red Hall. The previous person that lived in her room passed away peacefully at 101 years old, surrounded by her family. Her room was a corner room, which meant it was shaped differently from the rest. You walked in and then had a small alcove before the rest of the room. To see the entire room and bathroom, you had to physically walk past the alcove. Kat is now on daily doses of Risperdal and Ativan. She screams every night she is put into bed or taken to her room. Our other residents with Alzheimer's, whom we call shoppers, no longer enter Kat's room. They avoid it altogether. 16-month Mary is a completely different person. She is walking again, watching baseball games, and has even gone out with her family for church and lunches out. She is rarely given Ativan unless she requests it to sleep. Kat starts praying only in Latin or in Czech. She occasionally speaks English to herself and us, but it's rare. When I worked over on the third shift one night, I found out none of the third shift workers would go into her room alone at night. At midnight rounds, she grabs another worker, Kay, in front of me and yells, "Do you see him?" Her family stops coming into visits, saying it stresses them out too much. 17 months, a gentleman named Lou moved into Mary's old room. Within the first week he starts having night terrors so bad he wakes up screaming. He says he can't remember the dreams. Our RN says that she believes it's a result of his very painful dialysis. Kat is placed in the common area so she can be monitored. Usually we put her in the living room of Red Hall, but she has become very unstable. Mary wheels herself out and sees Kat. Mary hardly recognizes her but does eventually. That night she wakes up and requests Ativan. She says the dark man is back. A week later, when Kat is in her room, she starts pulling her call light and telling us that there is fire because she sees smoke. 18 most Mary passes away quietly one night. Lou is moved to another room in the same building. His night terror stopped the first night he spends in his new room. He is still on dialysis and has had no med changes. All of us workers who were previously comfortable in that building at night now feel extremely uneasy. Kat continues to degrade. She repeats the same phrase over and over now. She says something that sounds like "Va gt hote." A family member of another resident asks us if Kat is waiting for anyone. We tell her not that we are aware of, and ask why. She said she spoke a little Czech, and it sounded like Kate was asking, "Do you see him? Do you see him coming?" 19 months, a woman named Marion moves into Kat's old room. No problems occur. A gentleman on hospice moves into Mary's former room. He is not coherent and practically comatose. Kat is on hospice and bedbound. She is silent but stares at the corners of her room or at the closet. One day my sister and a coworker go to move her into a new position, and she has handfuls of family photos ripped in half on her bed. The photos had been in a collage on the other side of her room. The incident is blamed on another resident. The next day we find her call light cord ripped out of the wall and a string wrapped around her feet, approximately a yard away from where the cord would have ended. 20 months. Kat is still on hospice. She screams every few minutes. She is on a cocktail of Ativan, Haldol, Risperdal, and morphine. She still screams. A few days later the girls were working. The third shift hears a door slam. They go to investigate and discover it is Kat's room. They open the door and find she had passed away. I tried to keep the above as free of emotion as possible with just the facts. Now I want to share a little more of the emotional side and what I felt. When Kat moved into her corner room, after a few days it felt wrong. I had worked with the woman Lola that had lived in there previously. She had severe Alzheimer's and could get violent, but her room never felt like anything. When Kat moved in, a presence accompanied her. You felt like you were being watched constantly. As time progressed, it felt evil. I can't even describe it besides that. No one wanted to go into her room alone, so we begged her to become a two-person assistant, which management complied with. I am Catholic, and I found myself making the sign of the cross before going in there. A few of the other girls I worked with would say a quick prayer before going in. After Kat died, the presence didn't linger. Her family moved everything out, another person moved in. While the woman that replaced her was no picnic, she certainly was far from evil. Reality shifts while driving? I have two separate occasions. The first one was relayed to me by one of my close friends and her fiancé at the time. They're now married. It's been a few years since this happened. They used to live in an apartment complex by me, and at that time I drove a green Mercury Cougar. My car was very distinct. So one night, while they were on their way back to their apartment, they saw me in my car making a left turn onto the street where I live. This wouldn't have been a big deal except for the fact that I was actually nowhere near my apartment at that time. I was on the complete opposite side of town for the night. I have lived in this neighborhood for years and know the people and their vehicles over time. However, I have never once seen another person driving a green Cougar like mine. Ever. And two, her fiancé was so certain it was me, he said the person driving the car looked identical to me and everything. So that's my first story, which is weird but definitely not as weird as the second story. Story number 2, this incident just happened a few weeks ago actually and freaked me out at the time. Now I guess I just think of it as a glitch. I was at my parents' house about to get into my car, different car, no longer have the Cougar, when I noticed one of the back doors was unlocked. I didn't feel like locking it for some reason. I have manual locks, so I got into my car and reminded myself the whole way home to lock my back door when I reached my complex. This wouldn't even be a big deal, but there have been too many break-ins, and I trust no one. Anyway, I get to my apartment complex, turn off the car, turn around to lock the door, and what do you know, it's locked. I was so freaked out by this because I'm 100% positive that the door was unlocked. If it was locked, I wouldn't have been reminding myself every 5 seconds to lock it. My first initial thought was that there was a ghost in my car or something. I don't know, I was just freaked out. Like I said before, I have manual locks, there's no way I would have been able to do it by accident. These events are significant to me because nothing like this ever happens to me, but here are a few of my experiences with parallel realities. Drove through a town that doesn't exist. The incident happened a while ago. I was coming back from visiting my in a city quite far from where I live, and one of the major roads that takes me most of the way back was closed. So instead I had to take dark back roads further east until I could find my way back down to a familiar road where I lived. I drove through a small town called Blackfoot, which I thought had an odd name and seemed pretty dead at the time, although it was late at night. There was a wide road, but too wide for the size of the town. There were houses on one side of the town, and I only saw one shop while driving through. Upon returning home, I decided to research the town, as I find small, peculiar places intriguing. I enjoy imagining how people live there and appreciate reading about local history. I searched online, on maps, and tried to find the town by manually looking around my route on maps, but I couldn't find any mention of it anywhere. Maybe it's just insignificant enough to not warrant a mention. I live in the UK, but I thought it was definitely odd that it's not mentioned anywhere I can locate on maps. Weird stuff happens to me and seemingly only me. I'm an adult male, I've never done any psychedelics or drugs more intense than smoking weed, so I don't believe that any of this could be related to lasting effects of drugs that mess with your mind. I also haven't been diagnosed with any mental health issues, so I don't believe I sound delusional, but who knows? So I started noticing this weird stuff 3 summers ago in 2015. I had just moved in with my aunt for the season to find a job in the city and life was good. The day after I moved in, she started complaining that her TV was making a buzzing noise and static kept flashing on and off the screen constantly, which had never happened before. We tried turning the TV off, unplugging it, and hitting it, and while these actions helped for about 5 minutes, the issues would return again. After approximately a month, we concluded that the situation had become unreasonable, and she contacted the cable technician to investigate whether the issue was related to the connection. He rewired everything. It continued. In the fall I left to go back to school and she said it ended. That same summer, probably one of the weirdest things in my life had happened twice, to be exact. In the first month that I was in the house, my aunt and I were hanging out together in her office when we heard a loud crash, which we weren't fazed by because she has cats. The only thing is that the crash came from near the front door, and there wasn't anything near there that could have made that sound. We rushed over to discover shattered glass scattered across the ground at the front door, and upon looking up, we realized that her glass globe lighting fixture had fallen from the ceiling. That's not super creepy or anything, but to get from where it was hanging to the floor at the door, it would have had to drop onto the metal stairs/banister intact, roll 5 feet, and fall a meter onto the floor. If it had fallen as described, which already seems impossible to me, it would have shattered into relatively large pieces due to the low velocity impact from falling just a few feet, but instead, this thing was reduced to sand. So we get creeped out, joke about ghosts, and move on. Later in the summer she had to go away on business for nearly a month, and I was alone to look after the house and go about my life. One night, as the irresponsible teen I was, I stayed up watching the static white TV and fell asleep on the couch, which was pretty typical. By this time we had replaced the light fixture in the entryway, and it was the same as the old one. The couch was just in the next room over, so anything going on in the front of the house was pretty loud and echo why. I woke up the next morning pretty early, and still in my PJs I walked to the bathroom to brush my teeth. On my way there I stepped in a pile of crushed glass, and the shit hit the fan. I bolted to the kitchen for the phone and cried like a baby to my grandma, who lived nearby, about what was going on. She bolted over to help me clean up the mess, and I was inconsolable. The new light fixture had fallen sometime in the night without me hearing. I'm a light sleeper, 5 feet away from the door where the last one had. After she left that evening I became insanely paranoid until my aunt came home. Fast forward to the next summer when I returned for work again. A lot had happened between the summers of 2015 and 2016, so I'd matured a ton by the time I went back to live in the city, but I felt totally irrational for the better part of the summer. Early on I discovered that my favorite thing to do was cycle at night. It started out of necessity when I was craving something from the store I'd hope on my bike at like 10 or 11 p.m., but I started enjoying it, so I went out every night and just darted around for usually an hour or two. This helped me explore the neighborhood, and I soon discovered my favorite spot. It was a field between two sections of a suburb that was facing the opposite side of the valley, which was all woods. Pretty relaxing. I often saw deer and other animals hanging out there. One night, here comes crazy, I was just sitting on my bike taking a breather, looking around at how nice everything was when something caught my eye in the sky. It was a light that sparkled in every color very quickly and moved in an unpredictable pattern that I will never forget. At the time I didn't have anything to closely look at it and my phone's camera was horrible, so I had no way of zooming in, but it was traveling in one direction all while going up and down and darting from one point on its trajectory to the next in the blink of an eye. It creeped me out so much I rode home as fast as I could and basically broke down sobbing at the door. My aunt asked what was wrong, and I tried my best to explain to her what I saw. She didn't really believe me, nor did I, so the next day I went out and spent a significant amount of my paycheck on heavy-duty binoculars. The next night I went back to the field, knelt down, and balanced my binoculars on my bike seat so I could keep them steady. I saw it again, flashing colors I've never seen on an airplane: purple, blue, red, green, white, and yellow all at once. It would travel straight up, forward, down on an angle, and then up again over and over while going in one direction. This time I knew my eyes weren't playing tricks on me, so I filmed it with my phone through the binoculars and went home with my hair on end. About a week later I convinced her to drive out there with me to see if she could see the same thing. I gave her the binoculars, but she saw nothing when I pointed them out. We stayed for about 10 minutes on the road there with only lights from the street lamps and then decided to go home. Just as we both turned to get back in the truck, we saw something that still makes me tear up 2 years later. Literally right behind trees that were no more than 59 feet away was a massive triangular thing coasting through the air with one light on each point. Saying we flipped was an understatement. After watching it for a few seconds, it literally disappeared. In the blink of an eye it looked like it turned so that only one light was visible and went in the direction away from us. I jumped in the truck, and we silently drove home. That particular one was witnessed by both of us, and as implausible as it may seem, I can recognize a large gray triangle in the sky when I observe one. The rest of the summer was pretty uneventful aside from my nightly rides to the field, where I made my peace with whatever I was seeing. The only other occurrence was one night when I settled into bed and gradually fell asleep. I woke up a few minutes later to my blanket coming off me. I tried pulling it back onto myself, but it kept getting pulled under the bed. I literally pulled with all of my strength, but it would not come. Thinking nothing of it, for some reason, I turned on the light and looked under my bed, thinking I trapped one of the cats in my room by accident, as the door was closed. Nothing. Totally unfazed, which is weird to me now considering how weird it was. I went back to sleep only to wake up again to the sounds of really high-pitched talking. I couldn't make out any words, and I remember specifically thinking, wow, I hope this doesn't happen at work in the morning. Later in the fall, when I was back home, the pedagogic hallucinations, as I learned they were, happened 4 times again, once as scratching inside the walls, once as talking downstairs, once as a phone vibrating in the room over, and once as the sound of rustling fabric in the corner of my bed. The first time, late afternoon, I asked my mom to come up to my room and hear the scratching, nothing. The second time, I went downstairs to check if my mom was talking on the phone, but I found her sleeping in her room upstairs. The third time, around 3 p.m., it was only my sister and me home at the time, so I went to see why her phone was going off so much, but it was on silent and she hadn't heard a thing. That went on for the rest of the day, One vibration every 2 seconds without fail, I counted, for the next 9 hours. The fourth instance was so difficult to articulate that I chose to ignore it. However, it resembled the sound of a small, invisible creature running in circles in the corner of my bed. The only time before that year that I can remember anything similar was as a kid. I was sleeping. It was about 7 p.m. when I woke up to the sound of empty boxes falling over in the hallway upstairs. I went to check what it was because the hall was empty when I was put to bed and there was nothing there. Important, my house was not haunted. My parents built it on land that hadn't been previously lived on. Since then, small things had kept happening, like my stuff disappearing, regardless of where I was living at the time. Every single one of my computers dying in a weird amount of time. I had 3 in less than a year, for no reason, and other things barely worth remembering. And now, during the past year, a great deal has transpired, once again, and I am now residing permanently in the city with my aunt. I've learned about HPPD, hallucinogen persisting perception disorder, from an acquaintance, and come to the conclusion that I have it. I have visual snow in every lighting situation that makes everything look like it's mildly buzzing, and my tinnitus is deafening. But just as I'm realizing that they're not actually normal and that not everyone experiences it, I'm realizing that I've had this since I was a kid, especially the minor visual stimuli. I used to not experience visual snow, but I constantly saw drifters in my vision. At some point, that changed. However, my tinnitus has always been there and really strong. I can hear it over people talking, over TV, over music, over the noise of the car, over the bus, etc., and I'm looking into treatment for it. I've also learned about the joys of nature. A block from my aunt's house is a conservation area with trails and valleys and rivers, which I've started hiking, mostly alone. I always tell you where I'm going, share my location, and keep my data just in case, although it's a pretty busy place on nice days. One day I felt a bit more adventurous, so after my usual route, I walked across the suburb to the other side of the forest to explore new trails. A couple dozen feet after entering the new trail is a path that goes down into a valley with a creek that I decided to go down. Had a great time and vowed to go again. The next day, I went to explore more, and as soon as I entered the valley and crossed the creek, I became winded and could barely see. I'm not anemic, dehydrated, or malnourished, or anything else that could have caused that, but I had mad blurry tunnel vision, my hearing was off, and I just suddenly felt very drunk. Thinking it would pass, I drank my water and had a snack and continued on my trail, which went from the valley to the top of the nearby hill, but it got worse, so I turned back and went home to rest. That scared me away for a while, but when I finally decided to go back, it happened again. Shortness of breath, jerky walking, can't see properly, it all happened again. I'm avoiding that part of the forest now because I'm pretty sure I'm not welcome there. The 2 things recently that have prompted this are as follows. The first one was minor, the second seemingly the same but not really. I went home last week to visit my mom and sister in their new house, and a couple of hours after I got there, the Wi-Fi turned to crap. We had to reset it about 5 times for it to work properly, and then it went back to being terrible the next day. They claimed that the Wi-Fi issues had never occurred before that day, and when I asked my sister how it was after I left, she said it was great. This issue occurs at every house I visit. The second happened tonight. My computer has been acting up, so I decided to take it to Best Buy soon to get it checked out, and for that I needed my receipt that shows that I have computer care. I am aware that they can access my account, I simply wanted to have it regardless. Back when I bought my computer, I gave the receipt to my aunt to take care of because I was afraid I was going to lose it, which was pretty likely. So tonight I asked her if I could have it, and she said she would find it in her very well organized files. This OCD diagnosed woman has kept every invoice, bill, bank book, and important receipt from the past decade and hasn't lost a single thing, so I trusted she would come up with it in a few minutes. Hours later, she still had nothing, which was surprising because I would trust her with the archives of human history. She is that organized. It may sound like nothing, but out of all the hundreds of pieces of paperwork she has, my specific paperwork went missing and nothing else. Only mine. So when she told me that, she said it was as if aliens came down and made my one piece of paper vanish into thin air because it genuinely wasn't there, and that this kind of shit always happens to me. Which brings me to where I am right now, sitting in bed typing this. I could go on forever about the weird stuff that has happened to me, but I'll stop while I'm ahead. If anyone has any idea what the hell this is, let me know. A weird energy? Purely bad luck? Early onset insanity? Am I reading too far into this? The vortex in my house. So fellas, I'm a proud man of science. In a world filled with madness and confusion, I like to see myself as a foothold for reason. I would like some of your opinions on something that happened a while back. When I was a teenager, I was living at home with my ma, who I hate BTW. And I remember this one day I was walking upstairs to my room, and I saw a vortex open up at the top of the stairs. A strange entity emerged, which I can best describe as a kind of demon, followed by some shadowy figures. After a few seconds all of it vanished, and I was left mulling over the ordeal with a sense of confusion and disbelief. How can I reconcile with such an encounter when I am a complete atheist and don't even believe in this kind of thing? A few days later my mom found my adult stuff collection, and I swear I was blind because of those demon things, whatever they are. There have also been occasions when objects moved by themselves in the house. A spoon clicked into a cup by the sink. Books moved across the shelves, a glass flew off the table by itself, and doors opened and closed by themselves. There were footsteps in the hallway, and it all started after I saw the vortex, and this continued for months. Even my ma saw things as well, even though she is a dumb wench. Then, all of a sudden, one day, the activity stopped. What do you fellows reckon? Despite being a staunch atheist and a firm believer in science, I cannot dismiss the reality of what I witnessed firsthand. The only explanation I have is that these things are also products of evolution and torment people unseen. Didn't people talk about this stuff for hundreds of years?